Заседание Совета Безопасности объявляется открытым. Предварительная повестка дня данного заседания гласит: положение на Ближнем Востоке, включая палестинский вопрос. Повестка дня утверждается. На основании правил 37 временных правил процедуры Совета я приглашаю принять участие в данном заседании представителей Австралии, Австрии, Армении, Бангладеш, Бахрейна, Бразилии, Брунея Дарус-Салама, Бурунди, Боливарианской республики Венесуэла, Вьетнама, Германии, Египта, Израиля, Индии, Индонезии, Иордании, Исламской республики Иран, Ирландии, Исландии, Испании, Италии, Казахстана, Канады, Катара, Колумбии, Кубы, Кыргызстана, Ливана, Малайзии, Мальдивских островов, Марокко, Мексики, Намибии, Королевства Нидерландов, Новой Зеландии, Норвегии, Объединенных Арабских Эмиратов, Омана, Перу, Польши, Португалии, Саудовской Аравии, Сирийской Арабской Республики, Таиланда, Тимора-Лешти, Туниса, Турции, Уганды, Филиппин, Чили, Швейцарии, Шри-Ланки, Южной Африки и Японии. Решение принимается. В соответствии с временными правилами процедуры и сложившейся в этом отношении практикой, я предлагаю Совету пригласить принять участие в этом заседании представителя государства Палестины, имеющего статус государства-наблюдателя при Организации Объединенных Наций. Поскольку возражений нет, решение принимается. На основании правила 39 временных правил процедуры Совета я приглашаю принять участие в данном заседании господина Рамиза Алакбарова, заместителя специального координатора по ближневосточному мирному процессу, координатора резидента и координатора по гуманитарным вопросам Организации Объединенных Наций. Решение принимается. На основании правила 39 временных правил процедуры Совета я также приглашаю принять участие в этом заседании его превосходительство господина Коли Сека, председателя Комитета по осуществлению неотъемлемых прав палестинского народа, его превосходительство господина Ставроса Ламбринидиса, главу делегации Европейского Союза при Организации Объединенных Наций, и его превосходительство господина Маджида Абд-Аль-Азиза, постоянного наблюдателя в постоянной комиссии наблюдателя от Лиги арабских государств при Организации Объединенных Наций. Решение принимается. Совет Безопасности приступает к рассмотрению пункта 2 повестки дня. Сейчас я предоставляю слово господину Рамизу Алакбарову.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, Excellencies, after 2 years of devastating war and unimaginable human suffering, we now have an opportunity to conclude a dark chapter in the history of Israeli-Palestinian conflict and set up a course for a more just and peaceful future. On the 9 October agreement, based on United States President Donald Trump's 20-point plan, secured a ceasefire and hostage release in Gaza. It was the culmination of a remarkable diplomatic effort by United States, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey. I commend all the mediators for achieving this critical breakthrough. Tragically, it has taken us too long to reach this moment. The unbearable trauma inflicted on Palestinians and Israelis through last generations. The situation throughout the occupied Palestinian territory remains dire, and the destruction in Gaza is beyond description, while Palestinian civilians, children, women, and men continue to suffer immeasurably from the effects of the war and deprivation. And as we speak, there are still remains of deceased hostages in Gaza, while their families wait in agony to give their loved ones a dignified burial. The agreement represents hope for a better future, but the dynamics are extremely fragile. A return to conflict must be avoided at all costs. The remaining deceased hostages must be released without any further delay. Humanitarian assistance must enter the street at scale to meet the enormous need of the population wherever they are. All parties must abide by their commitments under the deal, and agreements should be reached to implement the next phase. Mr. President, since the ceasefire took effect, the UN and its partners have rapidly scaled up humanitarian operations across Gaza. The magnitude of destruction and continued suffering of Palestinians we have witnessed in Gaza is staggering. Many families remain displaced and without access to the most basic services. The urgent needs are immense in health, shelter, water, sanitation, food, and livelihood. The UN and its humanitarian partners are working now to implement our 60-day response plan. The plan sets out concrete measures to streamline customs procedures, expand access routes, facilitate the entry of critical items, restore essential services, and ensure the safe movement of humanitarian personnel. As part of the broader humanitarian reset, the plan is grounded in humanitarian principles, prioritizes those in greatest need, and enhances accountability, drives greater efficiency, and safeguards the space for principled life-saving actions. Already, as tracked by the UN 2720 mechanism for Gaza, we've increased facilitation in the entry of humanitarian supply by Israeli authorities. The humanitarian partners have scaled up aid delivery with a 46% increase in aid tracked by the UN entering the street in the first week of the ceasefire. Crucial assistance in the areas of food, hygiene, shelter, and health is being delivered in greater quantities, bringing much needed relief to Gaza population. But this is not enough. Much more still needs to be done. To fully meet our targets and ensure an effective response requires more crossings and functional relief corridors, safe passage for aid workers and civilians, unrestricted entry of goods, sustained entry of fuel, and operational space for the UN and NGOs, including renewal of NGO registration, all in accordance with humanitarian principles. The UN is closely engaging in all relevant coordination mechanisms, and I welcome the efforts of the member states to facilitate the scaling up of assistance, including through the new Civil-Military Coordination Center. While the ceasefire is in effect, the ongoing violence in Gaza, continued but sporadic attacks and strikes by IDF and Palestinian armed groups, as well as apparent killings of Palestinians by Hamas and other armed actors, also undermines humanitarian efforts and threatens stability in the street. Restoring order will be a critical step in facilitating relief efforts and supporting Gaza's recovery. We must act quickly to build on the current ceasefire towards a comprehensive agreement, or there is a serious risk that insecurity and violence will persist and undermine the recovery and reconstruction effort. To support the UN's response in Gaza, a robust aid coordination mechanism and accelerated international support will be necessary. Reconstruction will require a collective effort and should be Palestinian-led. Working with Palestinian Authority, international partners, civil society, and the private sector, UN is prepared to mobilize and help coordinate these efforts in line with the ceasefire commitments and the New York Declaration and building on the Arab Plan for Recovery and Reconstruction. Mr. President, the Secretary General has welcomed the advisory opinion issued by the International Court of Justice on 22nd October, which found, inter alia, that Israel is required to fulfill its obligation under international law with respect to facilitating relief of the population of Gaza and to cooperate in good faith with the United Nations and its entities. Mr. President, while we are focused on supporting the ceasefire and scaling up our response in Gaza, we must not overlook the alarming situation in the West Bank. Tens of thousands of Palestinians remain displaced from their homes in the northern West Bank in the wake of the large-scale Israeli security forces operation and continued closures, particularly in and around the refugee camps. Palestinians must be allowed to return to their homes and local economies need to function. With the annual olive harvest underway, Palestinians are yet again subject to deplorable acts of settler violence while trying to access their land. The violence must stop and perpetrators must be held accountable. Meanwhile, the Palestinian economy and the Palestinian Authority fiscal situation continue to face severe challenges. According to the PA, Israel continues to withhold some $3 billion of Palestinian tax clearances revenues, creating an unsustainable fiscal situation and impacting the Palestinian Authority's ability to meet financial obligations and pay public sector salaries in full. Mr. President, we are at a momentous but precarious juncture. The United Nations is committed to seizing this opportunity, but the scope and scale of the challenges ahead will require the full support of this Council and of the international community. Political will, financial resources, and a genuine commitment to creating a better future for all is needed. President Trump's 20-point plan and the declaration signed at the Summit for Peace, agreement to end the war in Gaza in Sharm el-Sheikh, have finally managed to secure a viable path towards ending the war. The forthcoming Cairo Reconstruction Conference, co-hosted by Egypt, the Palestinian Authority, and the United Nations, will be an important venue to advance recovery and reconstruction for Gaza. At the same time, we must not lose sight of the political horizon. We can build on the momentum created by the President Trump's plan and consolidate through tireless mediation consolidated through tireless mediation efforts. The international community has affirmed in recent weeks its commitment to charting a course towards sustainably ending the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The high-level international conference on peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the Global Alliance for the implementation of the two-state solution meeting on the margins of the UN General Assembly provide a pathway. The United Nations will continue to support all efforts to end the occupation and resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in line with international law and UN resolution, realizing a two-state solution, Israel and Palestine, of which Gaza is an integral part, live side by side in peace and security within secure and recognized borders on the basis of the pre-1967 lines with Jerusalem as the capital of both states. Спасибо большое за внимание.
Я благодарю господина Алакбарова за его брифинг. Сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю государства Палестины, имеющего статус государственного наблюдателя.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me at the outset to congratulate you for assuming the presidency of the Council and to thank you for convening this open debate. Allow me also to thank the Deputy Special Coordinator for his briefing and relentless efforts. Mr. President, we knew that the ceasefire was the only way forward, the way to save lives, the way to stop the massacres, the way to ensure families can reunite, Palestinian families and Israeli families. A ceasefire to stop the bloodshed, to release hostages and prisoners, to end an organized famine, to bring the horrors to an end. And finally, a ceasefire is here. Some are saying it is imperfect, it is volatile, it is transgressed, it is fragile, but it is here. There are reasons for skepticism. Some will say a skepticism informed by history, by experience, by precedent, by past pain, ache, and agony. But our role is not to be bystanders while things fall apart, or to have doubts, criticism, or objections and wait for time to prove us right. Our role is to collectively work to ensure the ceasefire holds, prevailing over those rooting for its collapse or working to make it fall apart. And we appreciate on that context, the collective efforts to ensure this aim and the constant engagement of the mediators of Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, and of course the United States at the highest level, to preserve this delicate ceasefire, to save lives that are too sacred. This is what the ceasefire is, an opportunity to save lives. What it will become relies on what all of us will do next. Mr. President, we do not forget those who awaited this day, but did not survive to witness it. Nor do we forget the survivors who welcome it scarred and starved and in mourning. We do not forget the journalists who did not live long enough to announce the ceasefire. We do not forget the doctors and the humanitarians killed for trying to save lives. We do not forget 20,000 Palestinian children killed by Israel, or their parents who have to walk the earth under their crushing shadow. We do not forget the orphaned, the maimed, the amputated, the tortured, and those still buried under the rubble. We do not forget Hind or Dunya, Reem and Khalid, Anas and Yusuf and Jubran and Eve and Salam and Siwar and Selena, Mahmoud, Adam, and many, many others. I've said before, I'll say it again, the most unjust expectation, that one that falls only on Palestinians, is that they should move on, regardless of the lives lost, of the limbs lost, of the loved ones lost. To have entire families obliterated and move on, to lose everything, everything you love, everything you built, everything you are, and be expected to just move on. But vengeance and hatred lead nowhere. Violence is an impasse. More bloodshed cannot be the answer. Justice and peace are the only way forward. But will these millions of Palestinians have justice? Will they be able to finally live in peace in their ancestral land? There is no Israeli security at the expense of Palestinian lives and Palestinian rights. There's no coexistence with occupation and subjugation. There is freedom for Palestine and its people, and shared peace, shared security, shared prosperity for Palestinians, Israelis, the people of the region, and the world. And here let me quote a very important historical document, the US Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We cannot formulate it any better. We are endowed by the same Creator with these same unalienable rights. Peace cannot come from the denial of these rights. It comes from their fulfillment. We are not less worthy of freedom, not less entitled to security, not less able to contribute to shared prosperity. Enough dispossession, enough displacement, enough death, enough despair. In Gaza, but also in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, where tens of thousands have been displaced, many have been killed, and where many communities are under constant attack. What do we tell Afaf Abu Aliya, a 55-year-old woman, mother of 5, knocked unconscious with a club by an Israeli settler as she was harvesting olives in Tormos Aya, and beaten again while she lied unconscious on the ground? Israeli settlers' attacks have intensified. You have all condemned them without exception, but this condemnation does not protect our people from these repeated attacks. These extremist settlers, together with occupation forces, spread fear and violence in the hope to intimidate and displace and push annexation in all directions. Till when? People killed and maimed and arbitrarily detained, homes demolished, settlements built, land expropriated, communities uprooted. Till when? If after a century of conflict and dispossession and displacement and wars and occupation and colonization and blockade and walls, if after the 7th of October, if after genocide in Gaza, we are not yet convinced that it is time for peace, that we owe future generations peace, what will ever convince us? Mr. President, over the course of the last few weeks, the entire world rallied around clear objectives following unbelievable outrage across the globe. From the Global Alliance launched by Saudi Arabia, the EU, and Norway, to the Madrid Group, to the Hague Group, to those who recognize the state of Palestine, and among those around the table, the last among them to have joined France and the UK that I want to acknowledge here, to Algeria and the members of this council, all working for an end to the horrors and moving towards peace. And the International Peace Conference, co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France, which demonstrated true leadership at its helm, and which endorsed the New York Declaration, a landmark document that charts a path forward to peace. The world mobilized for an independent and sovereign Palestinian state, for the two-state solution. They mobilized for peace. Palestine is committed to peace. It is committed to the full implementation of the New York Declaration, which charts a clear and irreversible path to freedom, peace, and regional integration. It will do its part, and it continues to commit to you here, once again, we will uphold our obligations. We are implementing our commitments, and we expect others to do their part and to uphold their obligations. Mr. President, we and many others around the world welcome the efforts of President Trump for peace and pledge to work with the US administration and with regional and international partners to move from a ceasefire to just and lasting peace. As was stated by the United States, it is for Palestinians to govern themselves. There is no substitute to Palestinian self-determination. There is a critical role for regional and international actors and mechanisms in support of Palestinian governance and independent statehood, and not as a substitute to them. We need to work together to ensure success. The task is monumental, but it is worth it. It requires collective and coordinated efforts. There were efforts and plans before, but maybe there was never before such momentum for peace, stemming from horrors the region witnessed the last 2 years. Just peace will change the face of the region and the fate of its peoples. The independence of the State of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution will pave the way for regional integration, a prospect many thought and still think impossible, but that is within grasp if we collectively decide to rid the region of wars and occupation and finally choose shared peace, shared security, and shared prosperity. It is time to end this conflict once and for all, so people never experience such pain and loss again, and all peoples can live in peace and security. These last few days, Mr. President, we saw families reunite, finally. Some with their loved ones still alive, able finally to embrace them, and some whose bodies were returned to be buried and to be mourned. There are still families waiting for their loved ones. We keep them in our minds. As the world tracked the release of 20 Israeli hostages, as it should, thousands of Palestinian prisoners were being released with undeniable evidence of the ill and degrading treatment they were subjected to. As the world followed the search for the bodies of 28 Israeli hostages, it must not forget that under the same rubble, you have the bodies of thousands upon thousands of bodies of Palestinians. This should be a moment to remind us all of our shared humanity, of the suffering future generation can and must be spared. This should not happen any longer. Regardless what camp you belong to, what cause you defend, what right you proclaim, no one should ever justify harming civilians, abducting them, torturing them, killing them. No one should ever justify holding remains, sometimes for years and decades, and depriving families from their ability to offer them dignified burial. Summary execution are never acceptable, regardless who commits them. No one should explain that there is any title or any right that can justify atrocities. No one, never, ever, under any circumstances. Mr. President, Gaza is an integral part of Palestine. Families in Gaza suffered more than enough. They have no homes to return to, no schools, no hospitals. Bombardments cannot continue taunting and haunting them. Aid cannot continue to be weaponized, as was said by the International Court of Justice yesterday. The ceasefire must be upheld. There is no other choice. Reconstruction must proceed, and we support all efforts in this regard and look forward to the conference in Cairo towards that aim. And here, allow me to thank the mediators for their relentless efforts that led to the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement. Egypt, which endured smearing campaigns and attacks. Qatar, whose territory was struck by Israel as it was mediating. Turkey, which joined these mediation efforts. And the United States. And let us speak plainly. The United States is a superpower. And as such, it has always a choice to fuel the fire or to help cease the fire. In this case, President Trump used all his weight to achieve a ceasefire agreement that saves lives and that releases the hostages. We all listened to the chants on Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. They know there would be no agreement without President Trump. And the region and the world mobilized around his effort as they understand that this is a chance for life, for freedom, and for peace. They understand he alone can save Israel from itself and from the temptation of brutal and indiscriminate force and annexation that has isolated it around the world. The 2 votes in the Knesset yesterday demonstrate that Israel has yet to renounce this path. Other policies and other measures and other statements as well. But we appreciate the clear message from the Trump administration against any push for annexation. We will work with President Trump, with regional and international partners, to transform a fragile and volatile ceasefire into just and lasting peace, with Palestinian agency and Palestinian liberation as our goal, with mutual recognition and peaceful coexistence as cornerstones. What we need is not a pause in the violence and injustice, but an end to them. Violence is an impasse. It must not be fueled nor tolerated. It must be stopped. And we will not relent in our rejection of violence against all civilians. Likewise, injustice must never be justified or shielded. It must be brought to an end. Palestine is committed to peace. We are the ones who need it most, and peace needs to be a shared objective to become a shared reality. We must seize this opportunity to end the suffering and work for freedom and peace, regardless of how great the challenges are. Help us demonstrate to our people that there is a peaceful path to freedom and to dignified life. The efforts to undermine the Palestinian Authority and its ability to perform its duties despite its full-fledged commitment to peace that has been put to test over the course of the last 2 years in unbelievable manners, aims at preventing our independence and our statehood. If there are requirements placed on the Palestinian Authority, it must be empowered to fulfill them. And Israel has also obligations that need to be monitored and implemented. We will not shy away from our obligations and from our commitments. We owe to our people to fulfill them, leading them to a path of liberation and peace. A new generation can wake up to a very different region where no one is killed, no one is abducted, no one is tortured, where cooperation and coexistence replace occupation and conflict, where shared security replaces perpetual war, where shared prosperity replaces pillage and devastation. Isn't that worth striving for? We owe it to those who were killed. We owe it to those who survived. We owe it to future generations. It is time for peace. Thank you, Mr. President.
Я благодарю представителя государства Палестины за его выступление. И сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю Израиля.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I would like to thank Deputy Special Coordinator for his briefing. Mr. President, today we gather at a historic moment for our region. Israel has achieved what many thought impossible. All of our living hostages are home. The remains of 15 fallen hostages have been recovered and given the dignity of a proper burial. Hamas has been forced to accept a deal it rejected from the very beginning, to return the hostages and to disarm. This achievement was not born of chance, but of a combination of courage and conviction. History will remember that in the wake of the worst massacre of our people since the Holocaust, that Israel kept its promise to defend our people, to bring our hostages home, and to eliminate future threats to our security. Despite the pressure of many members of this very council, despite the political theater, the condemnations, and the hypocrisy, Israel stood firm. We did not waver. We prevailed. But our struggle is not over. There can be no peace, no future, and no rebuilding of Gaza while terror still remains. 13 fallen hostages remain in Hamas's hands. We will bring them home and give them the dignity they deserve. The world must keep the pressure where it belongs, on Hamas, to return the hostages, to lay down its weapons, and to honor the peace plan it signed. Mr. President, we embraced the return of our hostages. Our nation has been swept by emotion, joy and relief, but also deep pain and grief. We have seen in the last few weeks mothers embracing sons, fathers reunited with their children, young couples holding each other again. In every home, in every community, Israel has felt the weight of what was lost and the miracle of return. Families reunited, lives once trapped in darkness have seen light again. But we cannot forget what they endured: starved, beaten, shackled, deprived of food, water, and light, forced to dig their own graves, humiliated, and yet they survived. They held onto their humanity even in the face of evil. As we welcome home the living, we also mourn the fallen who have now returned to us for proper burial. They remind the world that Hamas's cruelty knows no borders, no faith, no mercy. To the families of the fallen hostages and to all who still wait for the return of their loved ones from Gaza, we say, Israel has not forgotten them. We will do whatever it takes to bring them home, all of them. Mr. President, make no mistake, Hamas has already violated the ceasefire. They promised to return the bodies of our fallen within 72 hours. Yet still today, more than 300 hours after the ceasefire began, 13 fallen hostages remain in captivity. Hamas lied at the negotiating table, and they lied still to us, to the negotiators, and to the entire world. They know exactly, and we know that they know, where our fallen are. They simply refuse to act. This is not a matter of logistics. It is a calculated cruelty, psychological warfare designed to inflict pain and to buy time. Let me be clear, our fallen hostages will be brought home by diplomacy, if possible, by other means if necessary. It should come as no surprise that the same hands that refuse to return our dead are the ones that still pull the trigger. Just 9 days into the ceasefire, Hamas terrorists opened fire in an IDF-controlled area, killing 2 Israeli soldiers and seriously injuring many others. These are not allegations, they are facts. Yet, as Hamas violates the ceasefire, too many look away. There is no clearer example than the outrageous and false moral equivalence drawn in recent weeks, and I'm sure we will hear it today. We have heard commentators, diplomats, even world leaders equate the release of innocent hostages with the release of convicted terrorists. They speak as if these two acts were the same, as if those civilians who were kidnapped at gunpoints from their homes and held in tunnels could ever be compared with those who planted bombs on buses and slaughtered innocent lives. To bring our people home, Israel made choices no country should ever have to make. We released those jailed for murder, terror, and kidnapping. Let me give you a few examples from those who were released. Imad Kawasme, he planted a bomb on a Beersheba bus and killed 16 innocent people. Muhammad Aref Sama, who helped murder 23 civilians in Jerusalem, and many more. Yet some still try to blur the line between victims and their attackers. Let me be clear, hostages are not criminals. There can be no moral equivalence, none. In Israel, families cried with joy as loved ones came home after years in darkness. In Gaza, crowds celebrated murderers returning from prison. That is the difference between a nation that values life and a terror movement that glorifies death. Israel acted not from weakness, but from strength, to save lives and to advance peace. But peace demands more than promises. It demands disarmament. Many of you are already picturing Gaza's future. You have seen the plans, the ideas, hotels rising on the coast, schools filled with children, parks and public squares. Now I could hand each of you a pair of virtual reality goggles and show you the videos and the ideas that are circulated around about the future of Gaza. But before we get lost in virtual reality, let's remove the goggles and look at what is really happening today. Because before classrooms open or a single home is built, one truth must be faced. Hamas must go. Hamas must disarm. All the plans, the pledges, the visions, the videos, they are all virtual reality until terror ends. Members of this council, let me show you what reality looks like today in Gaza. This image was taken in the Sabra neighborhood in Gaza City on the 15th of October, just after the ceasefire began. Hamas gunmen emerged from their tunnels, clean uniforms, full stomachs, armed and organized. Almost immediately, they turned their guns on their own people. They attacked men, women, and children, hunted rivals, and carried out public executions. No evidence, no trial, just terror. And from the UN, silence. No condemnation, no accountability, no emergency session. That silence is dangerous. It emboldens Hamas. They walk the same path as ISIS, with the same brutality and the same contempt for human life. How can there be a future for Gaza while its people still live under fear. That is why disarmament is not only a security demand, it is a moral duty. Mr. President, peace cannot coexist with terror. The peace plan before us is an opportunity. But opportunity alone is not enough. We must act now to ensure Hamas is disarmed, not only with statements, with action, with pressure, with resolve. Hamas still sits on a deadly stockpile: assault and sniper rifles, RPGs, rocket launchers, anti-tank missiles like the Cornet. Beneath Gaza, their factories hum, their tunnels run deep. Disarmament means more than words. It means those weapons surrendered, the tunnels sealed, the factories shut down. It means dismantling Hamas's entire war machine, every command post, every weapons line, every tunnel. True disarmament strips Hamas of power itself, its ability to plan, to arm, to strike. Members of this council, blueprints and promises of reconstruction will not stop bullets. Only real disarmament will. Now is the moment to turn words into pressure and hopefully pressure into peace. Last week, the Jewish people celebrated Simchat Torah, a holiday that marks the conclusion of the annual reading cycle of our Bible, the Torah, and the beginning of a new cycle. Every year we read the same chapters. As we open the first chapter, Bereshit, the book of Genesis, we return to the moment creation began, and I quote, "And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness." Before creation came order. Before life began, chaos had to end. God separated light from darkness, bringing clarity, structure, and peace. So it must be now. Before Gaza can be rebuilt, terror must be removed. Before peace can begin, Hamas must lay down its weapons. Israel is ready to do its part and move forward. But peace cannot live alongside terror. Every day, Hamas refuses to disarm. They drag Gaza deeper into darkness. The time for excuses is over. Hamas must disarm now, fully and completely, so that light, not darkness, shape our future. Thank you, Mr. President.
Я благодарю представителя Израиля за его выступление. Сейчас я сделаю выступление в качестве представителя Российской Федерации. Благодарим заместителя спецкоординатора ООН по Ближневосточному мирному процессу Рамиза Алакбарова за обстоятельный доклад о положении в регионе. Для нашего ключевого мероприятия в ходе председательства мы выбрали открытые дебаты по ситуации на Ближнем Востоке. Они проходят в весьма примечательный момент, когда на первый план наконец-то вышла дипломатия, и у палестинцев и израильтян появилась надежда на длительное и устойчивое прекращение огня. Это именно то, к чему мы и другие члены Совета Безопасности последние 2 года призывали в контексте разворачивавшейся в Газе трагедии. Поэтому Россия приветствовала договоренности между Израилем и Хамас о прекращении боевых действий в секторе Газа, несмотря на то, что множество важных для БВУ сюжетов осталось за скобками и не получило отражения в итоговых документах. Установившееся перемирие во многом стало возможным благодаря неустанным трудам египетских, катарских, турецких и американских посредников. Высоко ценим эти дипломатические усилия, не прервавшиеся даже тогда, когда казалось, что шансов договориться уже нет. Отмечаем особую роль в этом президента Соединенных Штатов Дональда Трампа, чья личная вовлеченность в стремление прекратить бойню в Газе придали необходимый импульс для достижения договоренности. Во всем мире, с болью в сердце следившим за новостями из Газы, с большим облегчением восприняли известие об освобождении последних заложников, удерживавшихся в секторе, а также возвращении домой в обмен на почти 2000 палестинских заключенных. Среди вернувшихся домой израильтян есть и наш соотечественник, уроженец Донбасса Максим Харкин, вопрос об освобождении которого, как и других пленников, регулярно ставился российскими дипломатами в ходе соответствующих контактов в регионе. Уважаемые коллеги, 2 года боевых действий опустошили и выжгли души как палестинцев, так и израильтян. Заслуживающая осуждения террористическая атака Хамас 7 октября и последовавшее безнравственное коллективное наказание палестинского народа останутся в учебниках истории в качестве вопиющих примеров ненависти и антигуманности, назидания будущим поколениям. Мы лишний раз убедились, что насилие и ненависть всегда поражают ответное насилие и ненависть, а путь к миру лежит исключительно через диалог и взаимные уступки, в том числе во имя устранения коренных причин конфликта. Важно, чтобы установившееся пока еще весьма хрупкое перемирие не постигло судьба январских договоренностей, рухнувших на фоне взаимных обвинений сторон в их нарушениях. К сожалению, сегодня мы наблюдаем опасность повторения подобной ситуации. Так, палестинцы вменяют израильтянам регулярные нарушения прекращения огня. Израиль же недоволен затягиванием Хамас передачи всех тел погибших заложников. Призываем все стороны к строгому выполнению соглашения. Боевые действия, с жертвами которые стали десятки тысяч мирных палестинцев, не должны возобновиться ни при каком сценарии. Уверены, что этому поспособствуют и итоги прошедшего 13 октября в Шарм-эль-Шейхе саммита мира. Важно, что подписанный по итогам декларации особый акцент сделан на защите прав человека, гарантиях безопасности и достоинства палестинцев и израильтян, а также искоренение экстремизма и радикализма во всех формах, включая расизм, без чего невозможно процветание ни одного общества. Необходимо, чтобы аналогичную оптику мировое сообщество применяло и в контексте продолжающегося ущемления киевским режимом прав русскоязычного населения на Украине. Уважаемые коллеги, отмечаем, что благодаря достигнутому перемирию в секторе Газа наметился определенный прогресс в части госдоступа. По данным УКГВ, восстанавливаются поставки продовольствия и медицинских товаров, а гумагентство ООН, в том числе БАПОР, уже начали создавать временные учебные пространства для перемещенных детей. Этот положительный импульс необходимо сохранить и наращивать, чтобы облегчить страдания газовитян и обеспечить восстановление базовых услуг. В то же время мы не можем не отметить, что ограничения на доставку гуманитарной помощи по-прежнему сохраняются, а гуманитарные маршруты функционируют не в полную силу. В этой связи крайне важно снять оставшиеся барьеры и действовать в соответствии с представленным УКГВ 60-дневным планом гуманитарного реагирования. Рассчитываем, что недавний визит замсекретаря ООН по гуманитарным вопросам Тома Флетчера в Газу и Рамаллу будет способствовать налаживанию эффективной работы не только в секторе, но и на западном берегу реки Иордан, где сохраняется нестабильная ситуация, в том числе продолжаются нападения на палестинцев, о чем регулярно докладывает УКГВ. Уважаемые коллеги, перемирие и прекращение огня в Газе – это важный и долгожданный, но все-таки только самый первый этап на пути к долгосрочному урегулированию палестино-израильского конфликта. Избежать рецидива трагедии возможно лишь при возобновлении политического процесса на известной международно-правовой основе по формуле двух государств, предусматривающей создание независимого палестинского государства в границах 1967 года со столицей в Восточном Иерусалиме, сосуществующего в мире и безопасности с Израилем. Эта задача, неоднократно подтвержденная международным сообществом, не должна оставаться в тени миротворческих усилий и тем более игнорироваться при выработке планов действий и дорожных карт. Нельзя забывать и о незаконном строительстве израильских поселений на палестинской территории. Эти планы должны быть пересмотрены, а уже построенные в нарушении резолюции Совета Безопасности, в том числе 446, 452, 465 и 2334 поселения демонтированы. Хочется надеяться, что позитивная динамика на треке БВУ самым положительным образом скажется и в других частях региона, включая Ливан, Йемен и Сирию, и в конечном итоге приведет к общей нормализации в арабо-израильских отношениях. С осторожным оптимизмом следим за продолжающимися непрямыми переговорами между Западным Иерусалимом и Дамаском. Относительно стабильной остается обстановка вдоль Голубой линии, где еще год назад бушевала полноценная война. Пример Газы, когда подавляющая часть заложников была освобождена благодаря переговорам, должен продемонстрировать Израилю, что отказ от ставки на грубое силовое вмешательство и создание приграничных буферных зон в пользу диалога и искреннего учета интересов соседей может дать ощутимые плоды и помочь обеспечить безопасность собственных граждан лучше любых самых современных систем вооружений. Россия, неизменно поддерживающая доверительные и конструктивные отношения со всеми странами региона, без исключений, настроена продолжать носить свой вклад в дело мира на Ближнем Востоке как в национальном качестве, так и в роли постоянного члена Совета Безопасности. Готова работать со всеми сторонами, разделяющими цель достижения справедливого, долгосрочного и устойчивого мира на всем Ближнем Востоке на основе выполнения известных резолюций Совета Безопасности ООН, касающихся палестино-израильского конфликта. Я вновь приступаю к исполнению обязанностей председателя Совета Безопасности, и сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю Дании.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alec Barov for his briefing. I'd also like to pay tribute to all United Nations personnel and humanitarian workers on the ground working to deliver aid into Gaza, and to those civilians and hostages for whom the good news has tragically come too late. Mr. President, over the past few weeks, we have witnessed a rare moment in history. After more than 2 weeks of imaginable tragedy and loss, we have a long-needed ceasefire in Gaza. The guns have fallen silent, and in that silence, the first notes of hope can finally be heard. Denmark warmly welcomes the ceasefire and expresses profound gratitude to the United States, Egypt, Qatar, and to others who, in spite of numerous setbacks, have worked relentlessly to make this deal a reality. This ceasefire offers respite and relief. When the hostages and their families, who have lived in terror and despair, can finally begin to heal. When the skies above Gaza carry not the sound of warplanes, but the laughter of children. This is the promise that peace could hold. And yet, as this day finally dawns, we cannot forget the immense suffering that lies in its wake and the long road that lies ahead. Far too many will never wake up to see this peace. Those buried under the rubble, those who fell prey to terrorists, those ensnared by starvation, or those simply caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time. This peace is also for them. It is in their memory that we must sustain it. And we must not ignore that Hamas has taken the opportunity to reimpose its campaign of terror on Gaza's population. We continue to stress that Hamas must not be allowed to play a role in the future of Gaza. Mr. President, this ceasefire is not an ending. It is a beginning, fragile but full of opportunity. Now we must act with urgency. The road towards lasting peace will not be easy, but the Security Council must shoulder its responsibility. We must spare no effort, and we trust that this Council will urgently come together to establish a mandate for an international stabilization mission. Denmark welcomes the UN plan to alleviate the suffering of civilians. We stress that the UN and other humanitarian organizations must be fully enabled to deliver the humanitarian aid that millions so desperately need, in line with the agreement on the first phase. Every corridor must be opened, every convoy protected. Aid shipments must be swiftly allowed without undue impediments. Humanitarian and health workers must be protected. We take note of ICJ's advisory opinion yesterday, which clearly establishes that Israel must not obstruct the work of the United Nations and is obliged to accept and facilitate humanitarian aid delivered by UN organizations, including UNRWA. International and local NGOs should be able to work without unnecessary restrictions. In this regard, we repeat our call on the government of Israel to provide authorization for all international NGOs' aid shipments and to unblock essential humanitarian actors from operating. Denmark stands ready with $15 million in support of humanitarian and early recovery efforts, which comes on top of the approximately $153 million humanitarian aid already allocated to the Palestinian people since 2023. Our goal is clear. We must stop the insidious spread of famine. We must ensure that the sick receive the care that they so desperately need. Denmark is also prepared to further support the early recovery as well as the reconstruction of Gaza. But reconstruction is not merely about concrete and steel. It's about dignity. It's about proving to a generation that peace is not a dream, not a privilege, but a right. In deeds, not words. Mr. President, this ceasefire must not be a pause before the next tragedy, but the first step towards a lasting peace. The full implementation of the peace agreement is vital. We're on the right track, but we're not there yet. We deplore that Hamas has not been able to surrender all the bodies of the seized hostages as agreed under the framework. And we deplore that Israel is leveraging humanitarian access and as a result has capped the flow of aid into Gaza. We must not let the opportunity that this peace presents slip between our fingers. We now hold in our hands a rare opportunity to turn this moment of respite into a foundation for a just and enduring peace based on the two-state solution, Israel and Palestine living side by side in security, dignity, and peace. This, a two-state solution, is not only a pressing issue, it is a prerequisite for long-term stability across the region. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Дании за ее выступление. Сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Гаяны.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I also thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alak Barof for his briefing. Mr. President, our meeting today takes place at a time of great promise and opportunity for the people of Palestine. This moment, however, must be managed carefully, fully anchored in international law, and with the protection and well-being of civilians a central priority. With that said, Guyana welcomes the peace plan achieved between Israel and Hamas for ending the hostilities in Gaza and for the release of hostages taken during the 7th October attack. We commend the tireless efforts of the mediators, the United States, together with Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, and all who have contributed to making this a reality. Mr. President, 2 years of Israel's war in Gaza has wreaked havoc on the Palestinian population. Gaza itself has suffered massive destruction, with some experts estimating that the recovery could take decades and cost billions of dollars. Then there are also costs to which figures can never be attached. These include time that orphan children have eternally lost with their parents, the months of agony that the relatives and friends of hostages have endured, hoping for their safe return, and the psychosocial impacts of the war that would be felt for generations to come. But the peace plan has brought renewed hope, and we all must work to ensure its success. On this note, Mr. President, Guyana is very concerned about the violations of the ceasefire. We urge the parties to abide by the commitments made and to prioritize peace in Gaza. Mr. President, the next phases of the peace plan are extremely critical. We must eschew all ideas that do not line up with international law, that undermine the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, and that dilute the two-state solution. At the recently convened high-level international conference on the two-state solution and the general debate for the 80th session, there was a clear international consensus that the two-state solution remains the only just, comprehensive, and viable path to resolution of the Palestinian question. Guyana therefore urges that the next phases of the peace plan take this into account. We are baffled that less than 2 weeks after the Gaza peace plan was approved, Israel's parliament voted to give preliminary approval to a bill which imposes Israel's sovereignty over the occupied West Bank. We call on Israel to abandon this effort, which, if implemented, will be a violation of international law and will undermine the two-state solution. The West Bank is a critical part of the future independent state of Palestine. Mr. President, the war in Gaza reached many lows in the conduct of international relations, and I specifically wish to highlight Israel's belligerent approach to international organizations operating in the occupied Palestinian territory to meet humanitarian needs. We welcome the advisory opinion issued by the International Court of Justice yesterday, which clarifies the obligation of Israel as an occupying power to work with United Nations agencies to facilitate humanitarian aid in Gaza. We particularly welcome the specific provisions of the opinion regarding UNRWA. We call on Israel to respect the court's advisory opinion and to choose the path of compliance with international law. This is especially critical now that a massive humanitarian effort is required to scale up humanitarian interventions in the immediate term and to advance reconstruction and recovery over the long term. Mr. President, the central role of the Security Council as the UN organ with the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security must be emphasized, particularly as we contemplate the next phases of the peace plan. This includes the establishment of the temporary international stabilization force. I conclude by reaffirming Guyana's commitment to all genuine efforts aimed at achieving a comprehensive, just, and lasting solution to the Palestinian question. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Гайаны за ее выступление. Сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Соединенных Штатов.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Deputy Special Coordinator Alekpaev, for your briefing. Colleagues, President Trump's 20-point plan for peace offers a historic opportunity. His diplomacy brought the ceasefire in Gaza with support from around the world. It brought home 20 living hostages who spent 738 days held captive in a living hell. It offers hope for the people of Gaza. It offers hope for the Middle East to turn the page on a millennia of violence and to usher in a new age of peace and prosperity. Under President Trump's leadership, the United States has ended 8 conflicts across the globe over the course of just 8 months. And with the help of our friends in Qatar and Egypt and Turkey and the region, this most recent success may prove to be the greatest opening of them all. This historic success is cause for celebration. It's cause for determination, but it cannot be cause for complacency. As President Trump has said, the job is not done. And in that vein, Hamas must immediately return the bodies of the 13 remaining hostages, including the bodies of American citizens Itai Khin and Omer Nutra, as promised under the agreement. Their families, colleagues, their families deserve dignity. And Hamas must likewise follow through on its commitment to disarm. The president is not playing games here. And simply put, Hamas is finished in Gaza and does not have a future there. And if they do not follow through, they are in violation of the ceasefire and will face consequences, severe consequences. The future of Gaza can be one of peace and prosperity. And we also note, as has been noted here today, the extremely disturbing and bloody executions of Hamas, by Hamas, of the people in the streets of Gaza, in broad daylight, on camera, for the world to see. This is further evidence that Hamas is unfit to rule the Gaza Strip, cannot be trusted with the safety of the people in Gaza for a moment longer. And likewise, frankly, many nations have condemned Israel, and those nations should be embarrassed for their silence and for their hypocrisy as Hamas slays its own people. And for the global community that has been protesting and demanding peace for the Palestinian people, for the people of Gaza, where is the outrage? Where is it over these executions we've seen in recent days? Hamas is not just attacking Israelis. It's not just terrorizing hostages underground. It's not just using bodies as psychological warfare on families. They are openly killing their own people for propaganda, in addition to the human shields that they've used over the past years. And candidly, shame on the world for its silence in the wake of these executions. Well, President Trump has not been silent. He has clearly said Hamas terrorists must immediately cease these killings or face their own elimination. So when Hamas complies with the deal, the rebuilding of Gaza will be a major regional and global event. The peace agreement has already resulted in a dramatic increase in the flow of humanitarian aid to the people there, and we will continue to work to deliver aid to scale and meet Gaza's humanitarian needs, rehabilitating its infrastructure, including its hospitals, its roads, its bakeries, its water, its electricity, its sewage systems. We will continue to work with our international partners, with the United Nations, with everyone around the world to scale up the response and deliver aid to the civilians in need. But unfortunately, in the midst of this important work, as President Trump, as Vice President Vance, as Secretary Rubio and the team work tirelessly to bring peace to the region, the ICJ just issued a nakedly political, but fortunately non-binding, advisory opinion, unfairly bashing Israel and giving UNRWA a free pass for its deep entanglement with Hamas's terrorism. Colleagues, President Trump's peace agreement heralds more than the end of the war in Gaza. With God's help, it will mark the beginning of a strong, stable, and prosperous region, united in rejecting the path of violence, hatred, and terror. But in support of that vision, more broadly, the international community must urge the Iranian regime to give up on its false hope of revolution and forego its ambitions on its neighbors, to stop meddling in the politics of other countries in the region, and to instead engage in direct and good faith dialogue with the United States for the benefit of the Iranian people and the security of the region. Because of tough action on Iranian proxies, we are seeing historic opportunity in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, and across the region. And in this spirit, the United States supports and has supported the reimposition of UN snapback sanctions on the Iranian regime. The regime will continue to face consequences as long as it does not leave its path of destruction. Colleagues, we must continue to press Iran to do what's right for its people and what's best for international peace and regional security. With President Trump's plan, we are closer than ever to realizing the Middle East that generations have dreamt of, a region of peace, prosperity, harmony, opportunity, innovation, achievement. The more we are talking about infrastructure, about rail, about data centers, about AI, the less we will be talking about these historic animosities. And along those lines, we look forward to more countries in the region joining the Abraham Accords. We look forward to a future that can realize this dream. Thank you, colleagues.
Я благодарю представителя Соединенных Штатов за его выступление. Сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Соединенного Королевства.
Thank you, President. I thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alak Barov for his briefing today. Colleagues, for 2 years, the world has witnessed the terrible human cost of the Hamas terrorist attacks of 7 October and the disastrous conflict in Gaza that has claimed so many lives. We are now at an important moment of hope, thanks to President Trump's ceasefire deal. We have witnessed, with immense relief, released hostages being reunited with their families after an unimaginable ordeal. More humanitarian aid is now entering Gaza, and the ceasefire provides an opportunity for the Palestinian people to begin to build a better future, free from conflict. We commend President Trump and his team for their efforts in reaching this historic moment. We are grateful to Qatar, Turkey, and Egypt for the specific roles they have played. And we also recognize the contributions of many other countries from the region and beyond, including France and Saudi Arabia, for leading work on the New York Declaration, which have been instrumental in getting us to this point. There is much more work to be done. We call on both parties to uphold their commitments under the deal and avoid escalations that risk undermining it. We call on Hamas to cease violence. They must locate and hand over the final 13 hostages, fully sharing the information they have with the mediators and the ICRC to help locate their remains. We also call on Israel to ensure restrictions on aid are permanently lifted to allow the unimpeded delivery of humanitarian assistance at scale. This includes supporting the UN humanitarian effort, opening all crossings to both humanitarian and commercial goods, and ensuring international NGOs can operate without obstruction. As we have consistently stated, all parties must comply with their obligations under international law. The International Court of Justice delivered an important advisory opinion yesterday on Israel's obligations in this regard. We welcome its clear findings that Israel has an obligation under international humanitarian law to ensure the provision of aid in Gaza, and that UNRWA has a critical role in delivering the humanitarian response. We will continue to consider the full detail of the opinion carefully. President, we must now build on the momentum of the ceasefire. We need urgent work to develop transitional security arrangements, including an international stabilization force. And we need to support the reform program for the Palestinian Authority as it builds the Palestinian state. This should comprise Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, based on 1967 lines, with land swaps agreed as part of a negotiated, peaceful settlement. The United Kingdom is playing our part, for example, through humanitarian assistance, a deployment of staff to the US-led Civil Military Coordination Center, and by working with Egypt and others to mobilize private sector investment for Gaza's reconstruction. Finally, while the eyes of the world are focused on Gaza, we must not forget what is happening in the West Bank. Once again, we condemn attacks by extremist, violent settlers on Palestinian farmers in the West Bank during the olive harvest. We call on Israel to take action to stop this violence, end settlement, expansion, and lift its financial restrictions which risk economic collapse in the West Bank. Colleagues, we are at a historic crossroads. The way forward will not be easy. It will require courageous leadership on all sides and steadfast support from those of us in this room. But if we seize the moment, we have a chance to end the cycle of violence and achieve lasting peace for Israelis, Palestinians, and the region. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Соединенного Королевства за его заявление и предоставляю слово представителю Пакистана.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank you for convening this important and timely debate. We also thank Deputy Special Coordinator Ramiz Alakbarov for his comprehensive briefing. After the catastrophic consequences of the recent two-year war and the unimaginable humanitarian crisis in Gaza, marked by the killing of more than 68,000 innocent Palestinians, most of them women and children, along with widespread starvation, devastation, and displacement, hope has emerged with the signing of the peace agreement at the Sharm el-Sheikh Peace Summit. Pakistan welcomes the peace efforts led by President Trump and commends the crucial role played by the mediators, Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and the United States in facilitating the negotiations. We sincerely hope these efforts will yield sustainable results, including a permanent cessation of hostilities and a just, comprehensive, and lasting peace. Mr. President, the ceasefire, the release of hostages and Palestinian prisoners, and the restoration of humanitarian flows are welcome steps. Yet, the situation remains fragile. We condemn Israel's continuing attacks in Gaza, resulting in loss of numerous civilian lives. Such actions are contrary to the letter and spirit of the agreement signed in Sharm el-Sheikh. The peace efforts must not be derailed. Lasting stability cannot be achieved through continued occupation and oppression. Pakistan also condemns the Israeli Knesset's preliminary approval of two draft laws aimed at imposing Israeli sovereignty over the occupied West Bank and an illegal settlement, in blatant violation of the historical rights of the Palestinian people, international law, and relevant UN resolutions. Mr. President, Pakistan was a participant of the diplomatic efforts that began on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly's 80th session in New York last month, with a meeting of President Donald Trump with 8 Arab Islamic leaders. In a joint statement, Pakistan, together with the foreign ministers of those Arab and Islamic countries, Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Indonesia, and Turkey, welcomed the announcement by President Trump regarding his peace proposal. We reaffirmed our joint commitment to work with the US to end the war in Gaza through a comprehensive deal that ensures unrestricted delivery of sufficient humanitarian aid, prevents the displacement of Palestinians, the release of hostages, a security mechanism that guarantees the security of all sides, full Israeli withdrawal, reconstruction of Gaza, and a path for a just peace on the basis of the two-state solution, under which Gaza is fully integrated with the West Bank in a unified Palestinian state in accordance with international law as key to achieving regional stability and security. Mr. President, the International Conference on the Two-State Solution, co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France, was an important endeavor to advance the long overdue realization of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination and statehood. The conference and the peace efforts led by President Trump complement each other and should serve as a foundation for implementing the various commitments and realization of a sovereign Palestinian state. The following steps are essential. First, full implementation of the ceasefire, ensuring a permanent cessation of hostilities, Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, unrestricted humanitarian access, and a comprehensive reconstruction plan. Second, accountability for the grave atrocity crimes committed in Gaza. Third, an end to Israeli illegal actions in the West Bank, including forced displacements, illegal settlements, and annexations. The legal and historical status of Al-Haram al-Sharif and Al-Aqsa Mosque must be upheld. Fourth, the unhindered functioning of UNRWA, whose role is indispensable in providing life-saving assistance. As reaffirmed by the ICJ in its advisory opinion yesterday, Israel is under obligation to facilitate relief provided by the UN and its entities particularly UNRWA. Lastly, the launch of a credible, time-bound political process consistent with international legitimacy and relevant UN resolutions to establish an independent, sovereign, and contiguous state of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. Mr. President, looking ahead, the roles of the UN, the Palestinian Authority, and the Palestinian people will be vital to ensuring legitimate governance, reconstruction, and institution building in Gaza. The role of the Security Council will also be critical and indispensable for the next phases of the peace plan, including for designing and mandating the deployment of an international stabilization force to fulfill the tasks envisaged for it in the peace plan. Pakistan will continue to work with all partners to advance these shared objectives and to help restore peace, justice, and dignity to the Palestinian people. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Пакистана за его заявление и предоставляю слово представителю Панамы.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Panamá agradece a la Federación de Rusia por convocar y presidir este debate abierto trimestral sobre la situación en Oriente Medio, incluida la cuestión palestina. Reconocemos también el detallado informe del señor Ramiz Al-Akbarov, coordinador especial adjunto para el proceso de paz del Oriente Medio, coordinador residente y de asuntos humanitarios de las Naciones Unidas. Han pasado 748 días desde aquel cruel 7 de octubre del 2023. Los ataques perpetrados por Hamas ese día y su estela de violencia hasta la fecha han dejado en Israel más de 1.900 personas fallecidas. En las semanas y meses que siguieron, la respuesta militar en Gaza desencadenó un saldo devastador. Más de 68.000 palestinos han perdido la vida y alrededor de 170.000 han resultado heridos desde ese entonces. Señor presidente, Panamá rinde homenaje a todas las personas que han perdido la vida en esta guerra y también a los sobrevivientes quienes ahora tienen la difícil tarea de sanar. Por respeto a su memoria y a su sacrificio, lo mínimo que debemos hacer es sostener y mantener el alto al fuego alcanzado bajo el liderazgo del presidente de los Estados Unidos, Donald Trump, así como de Qatar, Egipto y Turquía. Saludamos este avance, que aunque frágil, no es un fin en sí mismo, es el punto de partida para aliviar el sufrimiento de la población palestina en Gaza, liberar a los rehenes vivos e iniciar la devolución digna de los fallecidos, y abrir también ese espacio a la política de la paz y la dignidad humana. Panamá insta a Israel y a Hamas a respetar y cumplir íntegramente lo acordado en la mesa de negociación. La paz no llega sola, se construye con voluntad política, con decisiones y concesiones difíciles, muchas veces, y con mecanismos y acciones que generen confianza. Ningún cálculo político justifica prorrogar el sufrimiento y elegir la vida por encima de cualquier otra prioridad e interés particular. El extremismo que hemos visto en esta guerra no tiene cabida en el futuro ni de israelíes ni de palestinos. No hay proyecto nacional ni causa legítima que se sostenga sobre el terror, el odio o la deshumanización del otro. El silencio de las armas debe convertirse en un compromiso de humanidad, mantener abiertos los corredores de la vital ayuda humanitaria, proteger a quienes distribuyen esa ayuda y salvan vidas, permitir que las familias se reúnan en paz y seguridad y que las escuelas vuelvan a ser escuelas y los hospitales, no zonas de guerra. En ese camino es imprescindible el acompañamiento y la asistencia del sistema de las Naciones Unidas para la tan anhelada reconstrucción de Gaza. Reafirmamos nuestro respaldo pleno al trabajo que realizan, pese a limitaciones, la UNRWA, OCHA, UNICEF, OMS, PMA y otras agencias, así como el Comité Internacional de la Cruz Roja y sus socios para garantizar la efectividad del flujo de la vital asistencia humanitaria. Su labor es neutral, imparcial e independiente y no tiene sustituto. Señor presidente, Panamá reitera su preocupación por el empeoramiento sostenido de la situación en Cisjordania, incluida Jerusalén Oriental. Desde octubre del 2023, casi 1.000 palestinos han muerto, más de 3.000 estructuras han sido destruidas y más de 3.000 personas desplazadas. Nuevas y prolongadas restricciones de acceso y movilización aíslan comunidades enteras, mientras la violencia y el vandalismo, incluido el sabotaje a redes de agua, buscan hacer inviable la vida cotidiana de miles de personas. Esta realidad no construye seguridad, por el contrario, atenta contra cualquier posibilidad de paz. No se puede permitir que Cisjordania se convierta en otro foco de guerra, como lo ocurrido en Gaza. Por ello pedimos que cese la violencia y las acciones en el terreno que contradicen el derecho internacional y las resoluciones de este Consejo, y que solo alejan la posibilidad de una solución política sostenible. Panamá reitera que no existe salida militar a este conflicto. Décadas de guerra y muerte no han producido ni producirán seguridad, ni mucho menos paz. Insistir en la vía militar es insistir en el fracaso. La única vía es un proceso político serio, integral y sostenido, basado en el derecho internacional, en las resoluciones de este Consejo, con garantías verificables para ambas partes y que como resultado de negociaciones diplomáticas asegure a israelíes y a palestinos vivir bajo seguridad y dignidad en dos estados con fronteras mutuamente reconocidas e internacionalmente acordadas. Presidente, una paz justa, digna y sostenible entre israelíes y palestinos puede tener un efecto estabilizador inmediato en el entorno regional. En el Líbano, reduciría el riesgo de desbordamiento a lo largo de la línea azul y facilitaría el pleno cumplimiento de las resoluciones 1559 y 1701, reforzando la autoridad del Estado libanés y la labor de la UNIFIL, cuyo trabajo respaldamos. En Siria, podría aliviar tensiones transfronterizas y mejoraría las condiciones del proceso político sirio, a la vez que reconocemos también el esfuerzo y la dedicación del enviado especial Geir Pedersen por los 7 años dedicados a coadyuvar en la construcción de un proceso político inclusivo en Siria. Y en el Mar Rojo contribuiría a disminuir la volatilidad que afecta a la libertad de navegación y las cadenas de suministro en beneficio de toda la región, incluida la situación en Yemen. Evitar una mayor escalada regional exige cumplir el derecho internacional, respetar la soberanía, independencia política e integridad territorial de todos los estados, contener a los actores armados no estatales y sostener mecanismos de verificación y coordinación sobre el terreno. Ese es el dividendo regional que debemos perseguir con urgencia. Panamá acompañará y respaldará toda iniciativa que consolide una paz justa, digna y sostenible de conformidad con derecho internacional y las resoluciones de este Consejo. Muchas gracias, presidente.
Я благодарю представителя Панамы за его заявление и предоставляю слово представителю Словении.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alekbarov for his briefing. Slovenia welcomes the implementation of the first phase of the comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict. We appreciate the efforts of Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and the United States. Slovenia champions a strong role of this Council in supporting the implementation process. We would also like to commend the pivotal role of the ICRC. We are deeply concerned over the attempts to violate the ceasefire in Gaza, including violence and extrajudicial executions by Hamas, arms smuggling, delays in the opening of crossings, and an escalation after attacks near Rafah. We call on the parties to fully respect the ceasefire. While the yellow line internally dividing Gaza should remain as short-lived as possible, arrangements for disarmament of Hamas and the setting up of international stabilization forces should proceed swiftly. Slovenia also remains profoundly concerned about the situation in the West Bank, including the discussions regarding annexation of the West Bank and the continuation of the Iron Wall operation. We call for de-escalation. We are appalled by the violence and the high number of killings, injuries, infrastructure damages, and displacement, as well as settler attacks in the context of the olive harvest season. Colleagues, the ultimate goal of our efforts in the Middle East must be the two-state solution. In that sense, we strongly believe that visions provided by the President Trump's plan, the New York Declaration, and the Arab Plan for Reconstruction of Gaza should be complementary. We must ensure efforts of the international community are equally complementary. It is therefore important to strengthen the Palestinian Authority with the view of reforming and ensuring their governance in Gaza, as well as the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Each country sitting at this table today has its own set of experiences and knowledge. While Slovenia has been consistent in our support to Palestinian people, to Palestinian Authority, and to UNRWA, we are willing to step up also with lessons learned from recent history of our region. The United Nations has a vast experience of establishing international interim administration in territories recovering from conflict. Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina can serve as an inspiration for plans how to put up a civilian administration in Gaza, even if not directly coordinated by the United Nations. Mr. President, we welcome the 60-day humanitarian plan presented by the UN. Humanitarian needs in Gaza continue being tremendously high, and we continue calling for sustained, unimpeded, and at-scale aid and fuel delivery across the Strip. Safe operating space for humanitarian actors, including international NGOs, must include protection of aid workers operating on the ground, as well as the registration process based on humanitarian principles. We further call for restoration of infrastructure and opening of crossings to eliminate the persistent threat of famine, and for medical evacuations and returns. Medical needs in Gaza are enormous. Doctors and medical workers should be allowed to work unimpeded and without fear. We appeal to Israel to release from arbitrary detention the remaining medical staff from Gaza, including Dr. Abu Safia of Kamal Adwan Hospital. Gaza must also be free and safe space for journalists to work in. Mr. President, the road to healing is long and will likely be paved with fragile peace. It is our collective responsibility to nurture this fragile peace in becoming a just and lasting one. It must be firmly anchored in international law, which includes ensuring accountability of all parties for their actions. In this regard, Slovenia welcomes the work of the International Court of Justice in issuing the latest advisory opinion just yesterday. We underline that the advisory opinion, as an authoritative judicial decision with great legal weight and moral authority, must be studied carefully in order to give full effect to the interpretation of international law as provided by the court. Thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Словении за его заявление и предоставляю слово представителю Китая.
谢谢主席。我感谢阿拉克巴罗夫副特别协调员的通报。加沙冲突延宕2年，造成前所未有的平民伤亡和人道灾难。近日，第一阶段停火协议终于达成，加沙战火得以平息，人质及被扣押人员获释回家，人道物资得以进入加沙，中方对此表示欢迎。当前的进展只是恢复持久和平的第一步，国际社会应当加大努力，凝聚更广泛共识，采取更积极的行动。第一，必须实现加沙持久停火。停火一旦实现，就不能再起新的战端。当前的停火应当成为全面持久停火的基础。但令人不安的是，违反协议的行为仍在发生，造成无辜平民伤亡。 加沙的血腥冲突已反复警示我们，对话谈判是解决问题的唯一出路，以暴制暴只会陷入恶性循环。中方呼吁有关各方全面遵守停火协议要求，推动实现真正的全面持久停火，确保加沙重获安全与稳定。第二，必须尽快缓解加沙人道灾难。在长达2年的围困封锁下，加沙民众遭受了难以言状的苦难。当前人道援助虽有所恢复，但仍面临重重阻碍，紧迫的人道需求远未缓解。昨天，国际法院发布咨询意见，明确以色列有义务与联合国近东巴勒斯坦难民救济和工程处等机构合作，向加沙提供人道援助。以色列必须履行占领方的国际人道法义务，开放全部过境点，保障人道物资大规模进入加沙和安全有序分发，解除对工程处等人道机构开展援助的限制。第三，必须妥善推进加沙战后安排。加沙是巴勒斯坦人民的家园，不是国际政治的筹码。任何关于加沙未来的安排，都必须坚持8人制8，这一国际社会业已达成的共识。都需要尊重巴勒斯坦人民的意愿。经过2年的狂轰滥炸，加沙满目疮痍，无法居住，必须尽快开启重建，恢复民生。我们欢迎埃及等地区国家为推动加沙重建的努力，国际社会应当为加沙重建提供积极的支持和帮助。第四，必须重建2国方案的政治前景。落实2国方案是解决巴勒斯坦问题的唯一可行出路，不可替代，不容否定。只有巴勒斯坦独立建国，实现民族正当权利，才能消除历史不公和暴力根源，达成巴以之间的长久和平共处。以色列必须停止在约旦河西岸的定居点活动，停止破坏巴勒斯坦民族权力机构的治理基础。国际社会应当汇聚努力，共同反对破坏2国方案基础的单边行动，支持巴勒斯坦早日独立建国，并成为联合国正式会员国。主席，安理会承担着维护国际和平与安全的首要责任，应当为维护加沙和平与稳定发挥积极作用。中方愿同国际社会一道，为推动全面持久停火、缓解人道灾难、落实2国方案，最终实现巴勒斯坦全面公正持久解决做出不懈努力。谢谢主席。
Я благодарю представителя Китая за его выступление. Сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Сомали.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to express my gratitude to Mr. Al-Akbarov, Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process and Resident Humanitarian Coordinator for his comprehensive and sobering briefing. We are deeply indebted to the leadership and the tireless efforts of all United Nations and humanitarian personnel working under the most challenging circumstances in Gaza and the West Bank. Their unwavering courage, professionalism, and commitment have been a beacon of hope in the face of adversity. Mr. President, the agreed ceasefire brings much needed relief from active hostilities and silences the guns. But the profound suffering endured by affected communities continues. The devastation of the conflict is staggering. Over 65,000 lives have been lost, primarily women and children, while millions have been displaced. Basic infrastructure lies in ruins, and entire communities are traumatized by the violence and loss they have endured. Over 90% of homes in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed. The extent of destruction to property and infrastructure is almost unimaginable, leaving most families without basic services or even a place to return to. It would take decades, if not more, to fully repair and inhabit again. The situation in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is equally alarming. This year has witnessed a significant increase in Israeli military operations, resulting in the loss of numerous Palestinian lives and injuries. Thousands of structures and essential infrastructures have been demolished, often justified as security operations. Tens of thousands have been displaced from their homes, with refugee camps like Jenin, Nur Shams, and Tulkarm bearing the brunt of devastating destruction. Simultaneously, there have been a notable rise in the settler violence, accompanied by further settlement expansion. These developments not only violate international law, but also diminish the prospect of the two-state solution. Mr. President, the road ahead is arduous and long, and the international community must rise to this challenge with urgency, unity, and a clear vision. In that context, I would like to propose the following. First, consolidating and safeguarding the ceasefire must remain a priority. Somalia commends the mediation efforts by the United States, Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar, which have been instrumental in achieving the current cessation of hostilities. This should not be only a matter of restraint. It requires robust international monitoring and accountability mechanism under UN auspices in order to support trust and adherence to the ceasefire. Second, humanitarian access must be ensured and expanded without a delay. We welcome the recent ICJ advisory opinion that Israel, as the occupying power, has obligation to uphold international humanitarian law. UN agencies, particularly UNRWA, WFP, and UNICEF, continue to face significant challenges, including delays at crossings, underfunding, and threat to their personnel. The unimpeded delivery of essential supplies such as food, medicine, and fuel to those in need should be treated as a legal and moral obligation, not as a concession. Third, a comprehensive reconstruction plan must be launched urgently. The unprecedented scale of destruction necessitates a coordinated and well-resourced approach led by the United Nations and supported by regional and international partners. Essential services, including water, electricity, healthcare, and education, must be restored promptly. Homes and livelihood must be rebuilt. The voices and needs of those most affected, particularly women and children, must guide our efforts, ensuring that dignity and hope are restored alongside physical infrastructure. Fourth and last point, there is a clear need to revitalize a credible political process. Somalia has taken note of the recent U.S. peace plan and encourages all parties to engage in a constructive, inclusive dialogue that respects international law and United Nations resolutions. Addressing fundamental issues such as the long-standing occupation and ongoing settlement activities and collective punishment remains essential for achieving a just and lasting peace. To conclude, Mr. President, we reaffirm our unwavering solidarity with the Palestinian people in their pursuit of freedom, dignity, and justice. This truce must not be a mere pause in violence, but the beginning of a sustained effort to heal, rebuild, and chart a course toward lasting security and hope for all. Somalia reiterates its steadfast support for the realization of an independent and sovereign state of Palestine with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital in accordance with international law and relevant United Nations resolutions. Our delegation stands ready to work with the international community to ensure that this opportunity is not lost and that peace in the occupied Palestinian territory and the wider regions becomes not just a possibility, but a reality. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Сомали за его выступление. Сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Сьерра-Леоне.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank the Russian Federation Presidency for elevating this meeting into a signature event. Mr. President, I thank the Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Mr. Rames Alakbarov, for his important briefing. I welcome the participation of the representatives of the State of Palestine, the State of Israel, and other delegations in this meeting. At the outset, we note that while aspects of the regional situation in the Middle East show signs of improvement, conditions remain highly volatile. In Yemen, Houthi attacks on shipping and Israeli targets have prompted retaliatory strikes, heightening fears of a broader Red Sea and Gulf escalation. In Lebanon, a fragile truce faces pressure amid airstrikes and displacement, against a background of political and economic fragility. Nonetheless, recent steps to reinvigorate inter-Lebanese dialogue and sustain core governance functions warrant recognition and support. In Syria, continuing hostilities in the north, coupled with protracted economic distress and grave human rights concerns, continue to impede prospect for durable stabilization. Nevertheless, the vision outlined by President Ahmed al-Shara in his address to the General Assembly in September of a new Syria anchored in peace, prosperity, and development, and underpinned by commitments to reform, national dialogue, and justice, together with ongoing political engagement and localized understanding, merit support. The present circumstances offer openings for confidence building and progress towards peace that should be carefully nurtured. Mr. President, against this backdrop, as we reflect on the development in the past weeks regarding the conflict in the Gaza Strip, especially the signing of the ceasefire agreement, we remain optimistic that despite the uncertainties, sustainable peace is possible. The bold leadership and political commitment demonstrated by the international community are undoubtedly contributing to the transformation of the region, thus providing relief and hope to Israeli and Palestinian civilians. For 2 years, following the heinous attack of 7th October 2023, which killed approximately 1,200 people in Israel, violence and devastation engulfed the region. In Gaza, the cumulative toll has been catastrophic, with more than 67,000 Palestinians reportedly killed as of early October 2025, amid widespread destruction and acute humanitarian need. These figures underline the human cost of this conflict and the urgency of consolidating the fragile cessation of hostilities now in place. In recent days, we have seen resilience and a measure of hope. Starved and traumatized civilians have begun to move back towards areas they once called home, now mountains of rubble and despair, seeking to reestablish a semblance of life and dignity. United Nations updates report significant internal movement within Gaza since the truce took effect, underscoring the imperative to provide safe access, essential services, and protection for returning civilians. In light of the foregoing, and at this critical juncture, with a promising prospect of achieving a lasting ceasefire and peace, Sierra Leone would like to make the following 4 points. Firstly, we welcome the agreement between Israel and Hamas following indirect talks mediated by Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and the United States, and note with relief the release of all 20 remaining living Israeli hostages, alongside the release of over 1,800 Palestinian detainees, in line with initial terms of the truce. We commend the tireless efforts of the mediators and the humanitarian actors, including the ICRC, in facilitating these outcomes. The current truce, though fragile, must be leveraged to faithfully implement Phase 1 of the agreement, upholding the cessation of hostilities, ensuring the full, safe, and unimpeded delivery of humanitarian assistance, and enabling freedom of movement for civilians and humanitarian workers. We accordingly denounce the incident reported on 19 October 2025 that violated the ceasefire and resulted in additional civilian casualties. All parties must refrain from any provocation or violation that could derail progress or imperil civilians. Phase 2 negotiations should commence in good faith without delay, with clear timelines and monitoring to build confidence. Outstanding concerns must be addressed to consolidate calm across Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Secondly, humanitarian access and recovery must also be scaled up decisively. Unrestricted entry of aid through all viable crossings, restoration of essential services, protection of medical evacuations, including to the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and support for education, shelter, and livelihood are urgent priorities. In this regard, we welcome the International Court of Justice advisory opinion issued on 22nd October, stating that Israel has a legal obligation to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza, specifically by facilitating the work of UN agencies, including UNRWA. UN entities and partners, notable UNRWA, required unimpeded operational space and adequate, predictable resources. The ban on UNRWA must be lifted and educational materials permitted so that UNRWA and the Palestinian Authority can reopen schools and temporary learning spaces for all school-aged children. A priority should be the reopening of the medical corridor to the West Bank and East Jerusalem, with guarantees of return for treated patients and caregivers. The ceasefire must evolve into a pathway that guarantees healing, reconciliation, trust, justice, and reconstruction. In this regard, we call upon relevant actors, including UN member states, regional organizations, and the international financial institutions to mobilize momentum and resources for the reconstruction of Gaza. Thirdly, Sierra Leone reiterates that a just and lasting peace is only achievable through a two-state solution, with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security. The International Court of Justice advisory opinion, including of 19 July 2024, provides important legal contours relevant to ending the conflict and ensuring respect for international law. The New York Declaration on the Peaceful Settlement of the Question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution, overwhelmingly endorsed by the General Assembly on 12 September 2025, offers a political framework to advance that vision. We further take note of the recent political initiatives, including President Trump's comprehensive peace plan and the Sharm el-Sheikh Peace Summit, and other proposals as input for future dialogue, while underscoring that the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and statehood must remain central to all engagement. Peace in Gaza must be matched by stability in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, where tensions have heightened since 21st January 2025 due to Israel's Operation Iron Wall, with a focus on counterterrorism measures. This operation, coupled with settler violence, demolitions, and seizures of Palestinian-owned properties, together with severe movement and access restrictions, have hampered civilians and impeded humanitarian work. These dynamics must be addressed to prevent further deterioration and to maintain the viability of a negotiated two-state solution. We are concerned by reports that the bill applying Israel's domestic law to the occupied West Bank, an act equal to formal annexation of Palestinian territory, has received preliminary approval in the Knesset. While this may be the first of 4 required readings before it becomes law, such a step undermines efforts to build confidence, sustain the ceasefire, and preserve a credible path towards a just and lasting peace. For the avoidance of doubt, the occupation remains illegal under international law, and any measure that seeks to alter the demographic, legal, or territorial status of occupied Palestinian territory are equally without legal validity and constitute a clear violation of international law and relevant UN resolutions. Fourthly and finally, Decisions about Palestine must include Palestinians, their institutions, leadership, and civil society in ways that ensure ownership, legitimacy, and consent. No durable settlement can be achieved without the full and meaningful participation of the Palestinian people in shaping their future. In closing, Mr. President, this Council should continue to support the parties and the mediators to ensure the full implementation of all phases of the agreement, uphold international law, and advance accountability for violations against civilians. A detailed briefing to the Council on the agreement implementation will assist in sustaining focus and ensuring compliance. Sierra Leone will continue to support efforts in the Council to sustain the present calm, relieve humanitarian suffering, and help lay the groundwork for a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Сьерра-Леоне за его выступление. Сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Республики Корея.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alakbaro for his comprehensive briefing. Mr. President, the Republic of Korea welcomes the release of hostages in Gaza, as well as the implementation of the ceasefire earlier this month, and commend the enormous efforts by mediating countries, the US, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey. We also appreciate the efforts made by President Trump to promote peace in the Middle East, as shown in the comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict and the Trump Declaration for Enduring Peace Prosperity. 10 days ago, the entire world witnessed what political will can bring about. All 20 living hostages who have been brutally held by Hamas for 2 years were finally reunited with their beloved ones, including those who briefed the Security Council in this chamber. The hard-won ceasefire could also bring a long-awaited respite to Palestinians in Gaza. Many of them could finally return to where their homes once stood, as elevated levels of humanitarian aid began to flow based on UN system. The Republic of Korea strongly believes that this achievement must serve as the starting point to rebuild peace and stability in the region. We urge the parties to this conflict in Gaza to strictly abide by the agreement and faithfully engage in the negotiations to achieve the second phase of the ceasefire. Reiterating our clear condemnation of the terrorist attack by Hamas 2 years ago, we reaffirm our belief that, in accordance with the comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict, as well as the New York Declaration, Hamas must not serve any role in future governance of Gaza and must lay down its weapons. We also urge Hamas to exert all efforts to locate and return the bodies of the deceased hostages. And also Israel must also comply with its commitment, including complete suspension of all military operations, full entry of humanitarian aid through all available routes, and withdrawal to agreed lines. At the same time, the humanitarian work of UN agencies, including UNRWA, must be ensured as detailed in the list of ICJ advisory opinion. In this regard, the Republic of Korea expresses its grave concern over the incident on Sunday relating to the deadly airstrikes by IDF in Rafah, responding to attacks against it, and also gravely concerned about the public execution carried out by Hamas in Gaza. We again call on both parties to abide by a ceasefire agreement. To this end, as a member of the Security Council, the Republic of Korea would like to express its willingness to actively participate in any Council discussions to support the ceasefire and relevant arrangement, including the deployment of the International Stabilization Force based on the comprehensive plan. Mr. President, for the last 2 years, we witnessed a dangerous circle of escalation and violence sweeping across the region. Thus, we must seize this important moment to end the vicious circle of regional strife and open a path toward genuine peace and security. We believe that the two-state solution is the only possible way to ensure peace, stability, and dignity for all in the Middle East. In this respect, we stressed our firm position that establishment of settlement in occupied Palestinian territory has no legal validity and constitutes a flagrant violation under the international law. We call on Israel to cease all settlement activities and demolition of the Palestinian homes, and to take measures to punish the unjustifiable violence by settlers, including those targeting Palestinians participating in annual West Bank olive harvest. The Palestinian Authority should also do more to carry out its reform, and Israel must fulfill its obligation with regard to its relation with PA, including the transfer of the tax revenues. Mr. President, the horrific terrorist attack by Hamas in October 2023 ended up only deepening the unfathomable suffering of Palestinians and compounding the agony of both Israeli and Palestinians. The massive military response by Israel over the last 2 years, according to OCHA, is resulted to killing of more than 68,000 people in Gaza, including more than 20,000 children and more than 10,000 women, also show that military solution can never achieve sustainable peace. So we hope that through this catastrophic experience, all actors in the region can finally realize the indispensable value of coexistence and peace. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Республики Корея за его выступление. Сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Алжира.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I wish to thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alakbarov for his thoughtful and informative briefing. 2 years after enduring relentless bombardment, carnage, starvation, and the threat of ethnic cleansing and genocide, the Palestinian people in Gaza are beginning at last, to glimpse a moment of relief. It is a fragile moment, yet it carries within it a seed of hope. Hope for a life lived in dignity. Hope for a future built on justice. Hope for the realization of their legitimate right to statehood. In this regard, we welcome the tireless effort of the mediators, the United States, Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, whose dedication helped bring about the ceasefire, release of the hostages, and exchange of Palestinian prisoners. We express our support for their continuing effort to preserve ceasefire and to ensure that humanitarian assistance reach every corner of Gaza without delay, without obstruction. We call on all parties to honor their commitments to maintain the ceasefire and to guarantee unhindered humanitarian access with the participation of credible humanitarian actors, including UNRWA, that is pivotal for the UN action. In this regard, we recall also the obligation of Israel, the occupying power, as reaffirmed in the advisory opinion issued yesterday by the International Court of Justice. Gazans need respite. They need time to heal. They need to rebuild their homes. They need to reopen their schools. They need to restore the rhythm of ordinary life. There, the scale of destruction is beyond imagination. The social and human toll is immense. Hundreds of thousands displaced, families shattered, children without classrooms, and unemployment at unprecedented levels. The reconstruction of Gaza must therefore become a collective mission. It requires the full mobilization of the international community, guided by solidarity, compassion, and vision of justice. Algeria will take its share in this endeavor, but rebuilding Gaza must not end with bricks and concrete. It must open a political horizon, a path leading toward a just and lasting peace, embodied in the establishment of an independent, a sovereign state of Palestine. Palestinian cannot continue to be overlooked or simply ignored. Mr. President, while attention is rightfully focused on Gaza, we cannot overlook the alarming development in the West Bank. Yesterday's vote in the Israeli Knesset to advance a bill aimed at annexing the West Bank exposes once again, the colonial nature of the occupation. It represents a blatant attempt to legitimize settlements in flagrant violation of international law and also of relevant Security Council resolution. We strongly condemn these actions and call upon the international community, and in particularly this Council, to uphold its responsibility to safeguard the prospect for a just and viable two-state solution. Continuing settlement expansion, settler violence, and annexation measures are gravely endangering peace efforts and undermining the very basis of a future Palestinian state. These acts stand in defiance of international law and against the resolve of the global community, which are clearly reaffirmed its support for Palestinian statehood through an ever-growing wave of recognition. Mr. President, what is now required is the launch of a serious, credible, and time-bound peace process, one that leads without ambiguity, without delay, to the realization of the state of Palestine Returning to the status quo before October 7 is not acceptable. Returning to the blockade is not acceptable. Returning to the denial of Palestinian rights is not acceptable. Impunity and disregard for international law are not acceptable. Justice, freedom, peace, and dignity for the Palestinian people are not only necessary, they are inevitable. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Алжира за его выступление. Сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Греции.
Thank you, President. And thank you, Deputy Special Coordinator Albarov, for your briefing. At long last, a ceasefire is now in place in Gaza and the hostages are now free. Under President Trump's leadership and with tremendous international engagement, the participation of the Greek Prime Minister in the Peace Summit in Egypt demonstrates Greece's important commitment in the day after developments. A positive momentum now exists in Gaza. The world's gaze is now upon the full implementation of the peace plan. We call on all parties to fulfill their commitments, allowing for the establishment of a lasting ceasefire and the return of the remains of the hostages. This should pave the way to a comprehensive political process. The international community should ensure the Palestinians have full ownership in all aspects of the agreement, be it recovery, reconstruction, and governance. Meanwhile, the UN and its humanitarian partners must continue to scale up their operations on the ground, as outlined in their 60-day plan. Additional food parcels are being distributed and additional bakeries are now functional. However, far greater volumes are needed. We therefore call for the full, safe, and unimpeded flow of humanitarian aid and supplies into Gaza, as well as the restoration of full access to potable water and electricity for the civilian population. In this regard, we look forward to the reopening of the Rafah border crossing, which can greatly facilitate the inflow of humanitarian aid at scale across the Strip. The role of the UN and its agencies remains crucial and irreplaceable, as confirmed by the advisory opinion of the ICJ issued yesterday. Notably, the role of UNRWA, toward which Greece has consistently contributed and has recently increased its contribution as it advances along the implementation of the Colonna recommendations. Similarly, we support initiatives such as the Cyprus-led Almathea Maritime Humanitarian Corridor. They can effectively contribute to the direct delivery of humanitarian aid complementing land routes. Greece stands ready to contribute to the reconstruction of Gaza and the flow of humanitarian aid, as was stated by our foreign minister during his meeting with his Palestinian counterpart in Athens. At the same time, incidents over the past weekend have demonstrated that the ceasefire is fragile. Diplomacy has delivered. It is now up to the parties to uphold their obligations and demonstrate caution and restraint. The envisaged US-led International Stabilization Force provides for a promising prospect in support of peace. As the custodian of international peace and security, this Council is the appropriate body to mandate this force. Greece will engage constructively in relevant consultations on the next steps. President, the time has come to forge a path towards lasting peace and security based on the two-state solution. The international community reaffirmed its overwhelming support for the two-state solution at the high-level conference co-chaired by France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia last month. Our side is now fixed on the activation of the peace plan's second phase, one which can establish sustainable peace and prosperity in the region. We rejoiced at the sight of freed Israeli hostages embracing their loved ones. We now expect Hamas to comply fully with the terms of the agreement and proceed with the immediate return of all the deceased adhering to the terms. Under the peace plan, Hamas is given a chance to decommission the weapons and leave Gaza. The recent appalling footage of brutal public executions committed by Hamas, as well as the skirmishes against rival factions in Gaza, make the issue of Hamas disarmament most imperative. It can have no role, direct or indirect, in the governance of Gaza. A viable alternative to its devastating rule in Gaza is sorely needed. A reformed and empowered Palestinian Authority, which Greece fully supports, is an indispensable and credible partner for peace. President, despite these developments, we cannot deviate our attention from the West Bank. According to the UN Human Rights Office, there is a clear increase of severe attacks by armed extremist settlers in the West Bank, 2 weeks into the start of the 2025 harvest. Settlement expansion and settler violence, including against Christian communities, are causes for grave concern. We thus reiterate our call for the preservation of the status quo of the holy sites in the old city of Jerusalem. We further stress that announcements on the construction of additional settlements which undermine the two-state solution must be reversed. In conclusion, President, the Middle East, a region vibrant in its diversity and rich in its history, seems to be turning a new page. This Council needs to uphold its role and responsibility in seeing that regional peace is established, so that the peoples of the region may finally enjoy a future of stability, dignity, and hope. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Греции за ее выступление. Сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Франции.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, je remercie tout d'abord le coordonnateur spécial adjoint pour le processus de paix au Moyen-Orient, M. Ramiz Al-Akbarov, pour son exposé et salue la présence des représentants d'Israël, de la Palestine, du Sénégal et du Kazakhstan. Le mois écoulé aura été marqué à la fois par le souvenir tragique du 2e anniversaire des attaques terroristes du 7 octobre aux conséquences dévastatrices et par l'espoir suscité par la signature d'un accord de paix historique à Sharm el-Sheikh. Cet accord, rendu possible par l'action inlassable des États-Unis, du Qatar, de l'Égypte, de la Turquie, est une étape cruciale vers la paix. Il ouvre une perspective, un cessez-le-feu permanent, la libération de tous les otages et un accès humanitaire immédiat et sans entrave. Il crée les conditions de la paix et de la mise en œuvre de la solution à 2 États. Les 2 parties doivent saisir cette chance historique. La France les appelle à mettre pleinement en œuvre les engagements pris avec 2 urgences. Le Hamas doit restituer sans délai les dépouilles des otages israéliens à Gaza et cesser ses actions armées, à commencer par les exécutions sommaires que la France a vigoureusement dénoncées. Israël doit permettre l'entrée massive de l'aide humanitaire par le biais des Nations Unies et des ONG internationales. La France appelle Israël à se conformer à ses obligations, telles que rappelées par la Cour internationale de justice dans son avis consultatif du 22 octobre. Monsieur le Président, pour transformer le cessez-le-feu en une paix durable, il faut à notre Conseil prendre ses responsabilités. Nos efforts doivent viser la mise en œuvre de la 2e phase du plan américain et de la déclaration de New York, massivement endossée par l'Assemblée générale. 5 priorités guideront notre action. Premièrement, la sécurité et l'ordre public. À travers le déploiement à Gaza d'une force internationale de stabilisation mandatée par le Conseil de sécurité à l'invitation de l'autorité palestinienne avec un soutien régional et international appuyé. Des forces régulières de sécurité et de police palestiniennes seront formées et appuyées et le Hamas désarmé. Deuxièmement, l'aide humanitaire et la reconstruction. L'accès de l'aide humanitaire doit se faire par tous les points de passage, sous la coordination des Nations Unies, de leurs agences, du CICR et des ONG, et dans le plein respect du droit international humanitaire. La France rappelle le rôle indispensable de l'UNRWA. Elle soutient les efforts de mobilisation de l'Égypte pour la reconstruction. Troisièmement, une gouvernance renouvelée pour Gaza. Notre boussole, c'est le droit du peuple palestinien à l'autodétermination et à un État de Palestine qui englobe Gaza et la Cisjordanie. L'autorité palestinienne réformée en assumera la responsabilité et le Hamas ne pourra y jouer aucun rôle. Quatrièmement, le lien entre la Cisjordanie et Gaza. La France est préoccupée par l'accélération de la colonisation, la violence des colons et les menaces d'annexion partielle ou totale de la Cisjordanie, y compris l'approbation préliminaire de projets de loi à la Knesset dans ce sens. La France rejette tout projet d'annexion, violation flagrante du droit international, grave menace à la solution à deux États. Cinquièmement, l'intensification de nos efforts pour stabiliser la région dans son ensemble. Au Liban, les autorités ont pris des décisions historiques courageuses pour assurer le monopole de l'État sur les armes. Elles doivent les mettre en œuvre avec le soutien de la communauté internationale. Et nous attendons d'Israël qu'il se retire des positions qu'il occupe et cesse ses frappes en territoire libanais. La réinsertion de la Syrie dans son environnement régional contribuera à la stabilité du Proche-Orient. La France salue le rapprochement avec le Liban, nouveau chapitre fondé sur le respect mutuel. Nous appelons là encore Israël à cesser ses incursions sur le sol syrien et à se retirer de la zone occupée. Monsieur le Président, il appartient au Conseil de sécurité de se saisir de ce moment historique, comme l'y appelle la Charte, pour en faire le point de départ d'un avenir différent pour le peuple de la région, un avenir de paix, de sécurité, de progrès humain pour tous. Je vous remercie.
Я благодарю представителя Франции за его выступление. Прежде чем продолжить наше заседание, я хочу напомнить всем ораторам о необходимости ограничивать продолжительность своих выступлений 3 минутами с тем, чтобы Совет мог оперативно завершить свою работу. Сейчас я предоставляю слово его превосходительству господину Коле Секу, председателю Комитета по осуществлению неотъемлемых прав палестинского народа.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. Je vous félicite et remercie M. Alakbarov pour son exposé. Nous sommes à un moment charnière. Après 2 années de souffrance humaine immense, le bombardement et de famine à Gaza, le monde a salué le sommet pour la paix de Gaza à Sharm el-Sheikh. Ce sommet a marqué le début d'un processus de guérison, de relèvement et de reconstruction pour le peuple palestinien. Le comité salue les efforts de l'Égypte, du Qatar, la Turquie et des États-Unis d'Amérique pour avoir facilité cet accord. Cependant, depuis la signature du cessez-le-feu, 97 Palestiniens ont été tués et 230 blessés à Gaza. Bien que des convois humanitaires soient rentrés, les restrictions à l'aide demeurent sévères. Le comité réitère son appel à un accès humanitaire rapide, sûr et sans entrave, avec un rôle central pour l'UNRWA et la restauration des services essentiels tels que la santé, l'eau, l'assainissement et l'éducation. Le comité appelle Israël à respecter pleinement ses obligations juridiques au titre du droit international, humanitaire et de la Convention sur les privilèges et immunités diplomatiques des Nations Unies. Il souligne l'importance de l'avis consultatif rendu le 22 octobre 2025 par la Cour internationale de justice, qui doit être respecté scrupuleusement. La souffrance du peuple palestinien doit cesser immédiatement. Les deux peuples doivent pouvoir regarder vers l'avenir avec espoir et sécurité. Le cessez-le-feu doit être permanent et irréversible et le blocus de Gaza levé définitivement. Le comité appelle les États membres à soutenir la pleine mise en œuvre du cessez-le-feu, à assurer la reddition des comptes et à créer les conditions du relèvement et de la reconstruction. Le Conseil de sécurité a un rôle central à jouer, notamment dans le déploiement d'une mission de paix chargée de protéger les civils, de garantir le cessez-le-feu, de faciliter le retrait de l'armée israélienne et l'accès humanitaire. Pendant ce temps, la violence s'aggrave en Cisjordanie et à Jérusalem-Est et la colonisation se poursuit. L'occupation du territoire palestinien doit cesser maintenant. La date limite de septembre 2025, demandée par la CIJ et fixée par la résolution ES 1024 de l'Assemblée générale, est dépassée. Nous espérons que le cessez-le-feu apportera une paix durable dans toute la Palestine occupée, y compris la Cisjordanie. La communauté internationale s'est exprimée à la conférence internationale pour le règlement de la question de Palestine, co-présidée par la France et l'Arabie saoudite. La déclaration de New York issue de cette conférence constitue une feuille de route pour préserver la solution des deux États et garantir la continuité du territoire de l'État de Palestine. Aujourd'hui, 159 pays reconnaissent l'État de Palestine, confirmant un large consensus international. Le comité va persévérer dans son soutien au peuple palestinien pour la réalisation de son droit inaliénable à l'autodétermination et à la création d'un État souverain et indépendant avec Jérusalem-Est pour capitale. Les conditions doivent être réunies pour qu'Israéliens et Palestiniens vivent côte à côte dans la paix, la sécurité et la prospérité. Nous devons commencer à reconstruire ce qui a été perdu pour les générations futures et pour tout le Moyen-Orient. Il est temps de regarder vers un nouvel avenir pour le peuple palestinien, mais aussi de reconnaître la tâche morale que ces 2 années ont laissée sur notre conscience collective et de dire haut et fort, plus jamais ça. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Я благодарю господина Сека за его выступление. Сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Казахстана.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to commend the Russian Federation for its leadership of the Council during this critical month. I also thank Mr. Ramiz Alakbarov for his valuable briefing. For the first time in 2 years, we see genuine hope for peace in Gaza and the wider region. Kazakhstan joins the international community in welcoming this historic agreement that has secured the release of all hostages and holds the promise of a lasting ceasefire based on the peace proposal of President Donald Trump. This breakthrough was made possible by the much appreciated tireless mediation and coordinated diplomacy of the United States, Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey. Kazakhstan welcomes the constructive outcome of the last week's high-level summit in Sharm el-Sheikh with its collective commitment to fully implement the ceasefire agreement through comprehensive political negotiations, resulting in a sustainable solution in the Middle East. President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev of Kazakhstan has expressed its strong support for this plan towards a permanent ceasefire and a credible political process, paving the way for lasting peace, stability, and dignity for both Palestinians and Israelis. We also welcome the successful conclusion of the high-level conference on the two-state solution and the adoption of New York Declaration under the able leadership of France and Saudi Arabia. Kazakhstan supports diplomatic initiatives aimed at regional reconciliation in the Middle East, including the Arab Peace Initiative, the Abraham Accords, and others. We reaffirm the vision of two independent and sovereign states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security within the pre-1967 borders and with East Jerusalem as the capital of the State of Palestine. Mr. President, we acknowledge the vital contribution of the United Nations under the leadership of the Secretary General in facilitating the implementation of the agreement and supporting the recovery and reconstruction of Gaza. We support the statement of Secretary General on ICJ's advisory opinion. The humanitarian situation in Gaza remains grave, and sustained efforts are needed to ensure unimpeded access to aid and other services. Kazakhstan underscores the indispensable role of the United Nations and its agencies, particularly UNRWA and OCHA, in supporting the Palestinian people and rebuilding communities shattered by war. We also believe that peace in Gaza must become a catalyst for human security and broader regional stability in the context of other protracted crises in Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. Finally, Kazakhstan reaffirms its readiness to continue constructively to achieve a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in the Middle East in full accordance with the UN Charter. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Казахстана за его выступление. Сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Египта.
خالص الشكر سيد الرئيس. بداية نتوجه بالشكر إلى روسيا الاتحادية على جهودها المقدرة في رئاسة المجلس هذا الشهر، وأثمن الإعاطات المقدمة اليوم بشأن الوضع في الشرق الأوسط. سيد الرئيس، لقد طالت التبعات السلبية للصراعات في الشرق الأوسط أمن واستقرار العديد من شعوب المنطقة، والتي تتساءل بشكل مشروع عن آفاق تصفية الأزمات المزمنة في المنطقة منذ عقود، وعن مصير وحقوق الأجيال الحالية والقادمة. وفي هذا السياق يجب ألا ندخر جميعا أي جهد لصياغة حلول لا رجعة فيها لتلك الصراعات، وفي القلب من تلك الجهود يقف مجلس الأمن وحده القادر على الاعتماد والإنفاذ، وتقف الأمم المتحدة القادرة على دعم التنفيذ، ومصر تعكف على تنفيذ ما تناديكم به انطلاقا من إيمانها بأن للجميع جذرا واحدا هو الانتماء للإنسانية. لقد كانت مصر بتاريخها التليد رائدة في الانفتاح على مختلف الشعوب والثقافات، ثابتة الإيمان بنهج السلام خيارا استراتيجيا، سلام صنعته بتضحيات أبنائها وفرضته بإرادتها وصانته بقوتها، إيمانا منها بأن قوة المنطق أسمى من منطق القوة، وأن العالم يتسع للجميع، سلام الأقوياء القائم على الحق والعدل والتوازن والندية وعلى احترام حقوق الغير وقبوله. مصر سيد الرئيس هي من كسرت الحاجز النفسي الرهيب بين العرب وإسرائيل عبر مبادرة شجاعة أطلقها الرئيس الراحل أنور السادات بزيارته التاريخية للقدس في نوفمبر 1977، فمدت يدها بالسلام متجاوزة حواجز كبلت المنطقة لعقود، بما عبر عن جوهر العقيدة المصرية في أن السلام هو الخيار الأمثل لصون الكرامة وتحقيق الأمن للجميع، وأن الشجاعة الحقة لا تكمن في خوض الحروب بل في صنع وبناء السلام على أسس العدل والتعايش المشترك. ومصر اليوم هي أيضا من استضافت في لحظة فارقة من تاريخ منطقتنا قمة السلام بشرم الشيخ في 13 أكتوبر الحالي لإنهاء الحرب في غزة، خطوة تاريخية حاسمة نحو طي صفحة حرب أليمة لا منتصر فيها، لبدء صفحة جديدة تتجسد فيها الإرادة الجماعية للمجتمع الدولي في تحقيق السلام والاستقرار في الشرق الأوسط. وتعرب مصر عن خالص الشكر والتقدير لجهود الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية بقيادة الرئيس ترامب وطرح خطته المقدرة والحكيمة لإنهاء الحرب في غزة وفتح آفاق تحقيق السلام والاستقرار. كما تشكر مصر كل الأطراف التي شاركت في قمة شرم الشيخ، وتشيد بالجهود المضنية للأشقاء في دولة قطر والجمهورية التركية بما أسهم في التوصل لاتفاق إنهاء الحرب. وتؤكد مصر عزمها مواصلة جهودها المكثفة في دعم تنفيذ اتفاق إنهاء الحرب، وتحذر من التبعات بالغة الخطورة ومغبة عدم الالتزام الحرفي بما تم التوصل إليه في قمة شرم الشيخ. تدعو جميع الأطراف إلى الوفاء بتعهداتهم المتعلقة بترتيبات وقف إطلاق النار ونفاذ المساعدات الإنسانية بدون عوائق وبالكميات التي تلبي احتياجات أشقائنا الفلسطينيين، وتكثيف الجهود على صعيد بدء جهود التعافي المبكر وإعادة إعمار قطاع غزة. وستقوم مصر باستضافة المؤتمر الدولي للتعافي المبكر وإعادة الإعمار والتنمية في غزة في شهر نوفمبر المقبل بالتنسيق مع الأمم المتحدة والشركاء الإقليميين والدوليين بهدف حشد الدعم اللازم لتمويل عملية إعادة الإعمار وتوفير مقومات الحياة الكريمة لأشقائنا الفلسطينيين. سيد الرئيس، أثبتت العقود الماضية أن استمرار الاحتلال وغياب الأفق السياسي لن يجلب سوى المزيد من الحروب، ولذا تدين مصر بأشد العبارات مصادقة الكنيست الإسرائيلي على مشروعي قانونين يهدفان إلى فرض ما يسمى بسيادة الإسرائيلية على الضفة الغربية المحتلة وعلى المستوطنات الاستعمارية الإسرائيلية غير القانونية، باعتبار ذلك انتهاكا صارخا للقانون الدولي وقرارات الشرعية الدولية التي أدانت ولعقود جميع الإجراءات الإسرائيلية الرامية إلى تغيير التركيبة الديمغرافية وطابع قانوني للأرض الفلسطينية المحتلة منذ عام 67، بما في ذلك القدس الشرقية، وهو ما أكد عليه الرأي الاستشاري الصادر عن محكمة العدل الدولية في يوليو 2024، والذي قطع بعدم شرعية الاحتلال الإسرائيلي للأراضي الفلسطينية وبطلان كافة الممارسات الإسرائيلية بما في ذلك بناء المستوطنات وضم الأراضي في الضفة الغربية المحتلة، وطالب إسرائيل بإنهاء وجودها غير القانوني في كافة الأراضي الفلسطينية. كما نرحب بالرأي الاستشاري لمحكمة العدل الدولية الصادر أمس بشأن التزامات إسرائيل في الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة، والذي أكد على أن القانون الدولي يحظر على القوة القائمة بالاحتلال تهجير الشعب الفلسطيني قسرا من أراضيه أو تجويعه أو استخدام الغذاء كسلاح حرب، ويلزمها بتوفير المساعدات ومواد الإغاثة الإنسانية وكافة مقومات الحياة، وعدم إعاقة بل وتسهيل وتيسير عمل كافة هيئات الأمم المتحدة في الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة وفي مقدماتها الأونروا، وذلك اتساقا مع المسؤولية الدائمة للأمم المتحدة عن القضية الفلسطينية. تؤكد مصر مجددا حتمية منح الشعب الفلسطيني الشقيق كافة حقوقه غير القابلة للتصرف، وفي مقدماتها حق تقرير المصير وتجسيد دولته المستقلة على خطوط 4 يونيو لعام 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية استنادا إلى المرجعيات الدولية ذات الصلة. كما تشيد مصر بالمخرجات الإيجابية لمؤتمر نيويورك بشأن حل الدولتين برئاسة مقدرة من السعودية وفرنسا، وتعرب عن تقديرها للزخم الدولي المتنامي الداعم للاعتراف بدولة فلسطين لتعيش في أمن وسلام جنبا إلى جنب مع إسرائيل على نحو يحقق أمن الشعبين ويوفر واقعا جديدا لشعوب المنطقة يمكن قبوله والتعايش معه. سيد الرئيس، تحقيق السلام في عموم المنطقة يقتضي انسحاب إسرائيل من جميع الأراضي العربية المحتلة بما في ذلك الجولان السوري المحتل، وتنفيذ قرارات مجلس الأمن ذات الصلة. وتدين مصر التغولات والاعتداءات الإسرائيلية المتكررة على الأراضي السورية، وكذلك الانتهاكات اليومية لإعلان وقف الأعمال العدائية في لبنان وما يصاحبه من خروقات جوية وبرية متكررة واحتلال لمواقع حدودية وإنشاء مناطق عاذلة داخل الأراضي اللبنانية، ويمثل خرقا واضحا لقرار 1701 وانتهاكا لسيادة لبنان ووحدة أراضيه. وتؤكد مصر تضامنها مع سوريا ولبنان في حقهما المشروع في حماية سيادتهما وأمنهما واستقلالهم. في الختام أعيد التأكيد على دعم وتطلع مصر إلى التنفيذ الكامل لاتفاق شرم الشيخ، وأقتبس من كلمات الرئيس ترامب أمام قمة شرم الشيخ وفي الكنيست: إن هذا ليس مجرد نهاية حرب، بل بداية عصر جديد من الإيمان والأمل، فمعا أظهرنا أن السلام ليس مجرد أمل نحلم به، بل هو واقع، وهذا هو اليوم الذي عمل وكافح وتطلع وصلى من أجله الناس في أنحاء العالم. كما أود أن أقتبس من بيان الرئيس عبد الفتاح السيسي أمام قمة شرم الشيخ: إن السلام لا تصنعه الحكومات وحدها، بل تبنيه الشعوب، حين تتيقن أن خصوم الأمس يمكن أن يصبحوا شركاء الغد، وأننا نستشرف مستقبلا مشرقا لمنطقتنا تبنى مدنه بالأمل بدل من أن تدفن ذكريات أصحابها تحت الأنقاض. أمامنا فرصة تاريخية فريدة وقد تكون الأخيرة للوصول إلى شرق أوسط خال من كل ما يهدد استقراره وتقدمه، شرق أوسط تنعم فيه جميع الشعوب بالسلام والعيش الكريم ضمن حدود آمنة وحقوق مصانة. وانطلاقا من تلك الرؤية الحكيمة لقادتنا وبدعم وإسهام من المجتمع الدولي بأسره، سيد الرئيس، يتحقق السلام وتنعم كل شعوب المنطقة بالأمن والاستقرار. آسف للإطالة وخالص الشكر سيد الرئيس.
Я благодарю представителя Египта за его выступление и хочу еще раз напомнить всем ораторам о необходимости ограничивать продолжительность своих выступлений 3 минутами. Настоятельно прошу их это делать. Я не хочу применять прерогативу председательства и прерывать вас. Сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю Индонезии.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Russia for convening this meeting and the briefers for their valuable insights. Indonesia welcomes the recent ceasefire agreement in Gaza as a ray of hope after unimaginable loss. Yet, this is only a first step of a long road ahead. And the compass is clear: the realization of the two-state solution and the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. Mr. President, tens of thousands of Palestinians are streaming back into northern Gaza, but they return to an unrecognizable land. 92% of residential buildings in Gaza have been destroyed, 125 hospitals and clinics are now in ruin, and over 86% of cropland was damaged. The task of this council is therefore a profound one: ensuring that the ceasefire is fully observed, allowing the rebuilding of Gaza and restoring the dignity of all civilians, that all parties fully implement the peace agreement with the ultimate objective of lasting peace in Palestine based on the two-state solution. Against this backdrop, allow me to highlight 3 points. First, permanent ceasefire must be maintained as a prerequisite for sustained recovery. It must be respected to ensure unhindered, at-scale, and safe flow of humanitarian assistance throughout Gaza. The UN-led humanitarian efforts must be protected without obstacles. The role of UNRWA remains indispensable. Its mandate and funding must be supported, as its work sustains millions of lives every day. In this vein, Indonesia welcomes the ICJ advisory opinion released just yesterday on Israel's obligations regarding the presence of the UN and other entities in the OPT. Second, genuine peace must be fostered. The Security Council, as the cornerstone of multilateralism for the maintenance of international peace and security, must contribute and play its role. This council must also work to secure that peace will end the occupation and fulfill the Palestinian rights to self-determination. Indonesia stands ready to contribute 20,000 personnel on the ground to credible peace monitoring missions once it is decided by the Council. We believe that peace must be protected by presence, not just promises. This will be our contribution to provide necessary security space for comprehensive peace plan negotiation. We urge the Security Council to lead and work toward this endeavor. Third, the last point, the future of Palestine belongs to the Palestinian. We must invest in Palestine's readiness to govern its future state and to lead its own destiny. For our part, Indonesia has continuously supported the Palestinian people. The Security Council must support this by ensuring that the question of Palestine remains high on its agenda towards the realization of two-state solution based on UN resolutions and internationally agreed parameters. Mr. President, as we celebrate the UN 80th anniversary, the question of Palestine remains the definitive test of whether this organization can fulfill its promise to the Palestinian. It is time for us to bring peace to the Palestinians. I thank you, Mr. President.
Я благодарю представителя Индонезии за ее выступление и сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Филиппин.
Mr. President, the Philippines welcomes the agreement to secure a ceasefire deal and hostage release in Gaza based on the 20-point peace plan put forward by President Trump. We also commend the diplomatic efforts of the United States, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey in brokering this landmark deal through intensive diplomacy. We hope that the agreement will be implemented completely and expeditiously to stop the fighting in Gaza, scale up the delivery of sustained humanitarian relief, and advance recovery and reconstruction efforts in Gaza. This is long overdue. The people of Gaza desperately need free and unimpeded access to life-saving humanitarian aid, to food, water, and medicine. In this regard, we join the Secretary General's call for all stakeholders to seize this momentous opportunity to establish a credible political path forward towards ending the occupation, recognizing the right to self-determination of the Palestinian people, leading to a two-state solution to enable Israelis and Palestinians to live in peace and security. The adoption of the New York Declaration on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution should complement international efforts towards achieving a just and lasting peace in the Middle East. The Philippines joins member states in thanking France and Saudi Arabia for their commendable leadership in organizing the international conference that produced the New York Declaration. Mr. President, we recognize that the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is key to the region's peace and stability. In this regard, the Philippines reiterates its support for international and regional diplomatic efforts to achieve a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in the Middle East. The Philippines also reiterates its consistent support for the two-state solution as the most viable and long-term solution to the Palestine-Israeli conflict. Lasting peace can only be achieved when Palestinians and Israelis can live side by side in their own sovereign, independent states, in dignity, harmony, and prosperity, where their rights, aspirations, and security are fully respected and upheld. Dialogue and negotiations based on trust and mutual understanding between Palestine and Israel are vital. We therefore support steps that would expand the space for meaningful dialogues and negotiations and resolve the conflict by peaceful means and in accordance with international law. Beyond Gaza, the wider Middle East continues to grapple with overlapping crises that threaten regional stability, from tensions in the Gulf to the humanitarian situation in Yemen. The Philippines calls on all parties to exercise restraint and engage in constructive dialogue to prevent further escalation. We continue to support diplomatic efforts that promote de-escalation, regional cooperation, and respect for international law. As a trusted partner, innovative pathfinder, and committed peacemaker, the Philippines is ready to play an active role in supporting all efforts among concerned parties and the United Nations to end conflicts and maintain international peace and security. Thank you, Mr. President.
Я благодарю представителя Филиппин за его выступление. Сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Иордании.
شكرا سيد الرئيس، وأود بداية أن أهنئكم على تولي مهامكم برئاسة هذا المجلس لهذا الشهر. السيد الرئيس، تنعقد هذه الجلسة الهامة في مرحلة مفصلية تشهدها الأوضاع في الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة، وذلك في أعقاب التوصل للاتفاق الذي يقضي بإنهاء الحرب الإسرائيلية الوحشية التي استمرت لأكثر من عامين على غزة، والتي قتلت خلالها إسرائيل ما يزيد عن 68 ألف فلسطيني، ودمرت كل مقومات الحياة، ومنعت دخول المساعدات الإنسانية، واستهدفت بطريقة ممنهجة الصحفيين والعمال الإنسانيين والموظفين الأمميين. في ضوء ذلك اسمحوا لي أن أؤكد على النقاط الخمسة التالية. أولاً، يرحب الأردن بالتوقيع على وثيقة اتفاق غزة خلال قمة شرم الشيخ مؤخراً، ويثمن الدور الحاسم الذي اطلع به فخامة الرئيس الأمريكي في التوصل إلى اتفاق وقف إطلاق النار والتزامه بإنهاء الحرب وضمان تدفق المساعدات ومنع التهجير ودفع جهود إعادة الإعمار ومنع ضم الضفة الغربية وتعزيز مسار تحقيق السلام في المنطقة. ولا يسعنا إلا أن نعرب عن تقديرنا العميق للجهود الحثيثة للأشقاء في مصر وقطر وتركيا في التوصل لهذا الاتفاق. ثانياً، يؤكد الأردن على مركزية الالتزام التام باتفاق وقف إطلاق النار في غزة وتكاتف الجهود المبذولة لإنجاز المرحلة الأولى من الاتفاق، بما في ذلك ترتيبات وقف العمليات العسكرية وتبادل الأسرى والانسحاب الكامل لجيش الاحتلال الإسرائيلي وضمان إدخال المساعدات الإنسانية بشكل مستدام إلى سكان القطاع، وذلك من أجل الانتقال إلى المرحلة الثانية من الاتفاق وصولاً إلى إطلاق أفق سياسي حقيقي لتحقيق السلام الشامل على أساس حل الدولتين وفق قرارات الشرعية الدولية ومبادرة السلام العربية. ثالثاً، يؤكد الأردن على أهمية معالجة التبعات الكارثية التي خلفها العدوان الإسرائيلي على غزة، ونجدد في هذا المقام جاهزية الأردن في الاستمرار في الاطلاع بدوره الإنساني الفاعل في إيصال المساعدات إلى الأشقاء في غزة فور إزالة القيود الإسرائيلية المخالفة للقانون الدولي الإنسانية والمبادئ الإنسانية والإجراءات الاحترازية التي أمرت بها محكمة العدل الدولية. سيد الرئيس، ولا يسعنا كذلك إلا أن نؤكد على الوجود المحوري لوكالة الأونروا في أداء واجبها الذي لا غنى عنه في تقديم خدماتها الأساسية لنحو 5.5 مليون لاجئ في جميع مناطق عملها وفقا لتفويضها الأممي، وخاصة في غزة والأراضي المحتلة في أيامنا هذه. ونثمن في هذا السياق ونؤيد الرأي الاستشاري لمحكمة العدل الدولية أمس، والذي أكد أن إسرائيل ملزمة بأن تضمن الاحترام الكامل لحرمة مقرات الأمم المتحدة وحصاناتها بما في ذلك للأونروا، وأن تلتزم بضمان الاحترام الكامل للامتيازات والحصانات للعاملين في الأمم المتحدة، وكذلك والذي أكد كذلك على دور الأونروا المركزي الذي لا غنى عنه. رابعا، يدين الأردن مصادقة الكنيسة الإسرائيلي على مشروعي قانونين يهدفان إلى فرض ما يسمى بالسيادة الإسرائيلية على الضفة الغربية المحتلة وعلى المستوطنات الاستعمارية الإسرائيلية غير القانونية، انتهاكا صارخا للقانون الدولي ولقرارات مجلسكم الموقر هذا، وخاصة القرار 2334. ونجدد كذلك إدانتنا لاستمرار الاحتلال الإسرائيلي غير المشروع، والتي قضت محكمة العدل الدولية بالضرورة إنهائه فورا، ومواصلة الإجراءات والممارسات الإسرائيلية اللا شرعية في الأراضي المحتلة، وفي مقدمتها استمرار التوسع في الاستيطان وهدم المنازل ومصادرة الأراضي وإرهاب المستوطنين، فضلا عن الانتهاكات الإسرائيلية المستمرة للوضع القانوني والتاريخي القائم في القدس الشريف. وفي هذا الصدد سيستمر الأردن انطلاقا من الوصاية الهاشمية في الدفاع عن المقدسات الإسلامية والمسيحية في القدس الشريف وحمايتها. خامسا وأخيرا، نؤكد مواصلة المملكة لعملها بالتنسيق مع الأشقاء والشركاء الإقليميين والدوليين ومجلسكم الموقر هذا لإطلاق مسار جاد وفاعل نحو تحقيق السلام العادل والشامل القائم على أساس حل الدولتين، بما يضمن تلبية حقوق الشعب الفلسطيني كاملة وقيام دولته المستقلة ذات السيادة على خطوط 4 من حزيران 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية، وهو حق وليس منة من أحد، سبيلا وحيدا لتحقيق الأمن والاستقرار في المنطقة. ولا يسعنا إلا أن نشدد على أهمية دور مجلسكم الكريم في تحقيق ذلك عملا بالمسؤوليات المنوطة بكم في صون السلم والأمن الدوليين وفقا لميثاق الأمم المتحدة. شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Я благодарю представителя Иордании за его выступление. Сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Австрии.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Excellencies, colleagues, the latest developments in the Middle East give rise to a long-awaited sense of hope. Hope that many had already lost. Hope for the hostages and their families, that some of their wounds will heal someday after being held under inhumane and intolerable conditions by Hamas. Hope for the civilians in Gaza enduring unbearable suffering, many of them displaced multiple times and their livelihoods destroyed. And hope for all people in the Middle East that a different region and a different logic is possible. A region in which Israelis and Palestinians alike can live in two democratic states in peace, safety, prosperity, dignity, and the full enjoyment of their human rights. Austria therefore commends the leadership of the United States, as well as the contributions by Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and others to end this horrible war and bring the hostages home. Austria stands ready to do its part for the implementation of the agreement and to forge a way forward towards peace. Let me highlight 3 points for the way forward. First, the deal must be implemented swiftly and fully. We express our sincere hope and expectation that all parties uphold their commitments in good faith and without delay. Life-saving humanitarian aid must reach every person in need in Gaza immediately and at scale. We welcome the efforts by the United Nations to deliver humanitarian aid as quickly as possible. The UN must be able to carry out their work without restrictions and impediments. Hamas must do everything to return the remains of all deceased hostages without any delay. Austria supports the envisioned stabilization mission for Gaza. The Security Council has an essential role to play and should provide the legal and political framework necessary to make this mission credible and effective. Second, Gaza needs our support in the medium term. The reconstruction will require massive and concerted efforts from many partners. Austria stands ready to contribute to these efforts, together with our European partners, partners from the region and beyond. But let me also be clear, Hamas has no place in Gaza's future governance. It must disarm and relinquish control once and for all. Austria, also via the European Union, will continue to support the Palestinian Authority to help address its most pressing needs, but also to build institutional capacities and implement its necessary reform agenda for the PA to take over the governance of Gaza in the medium term. A reformed and strong Palestinian Authority is also in the interest of Israel. UNRWA will continue to be a stabilizing factor in the region, not least through the delivery of educational and health services until a comprehensive political arrangement has been reached. Austria will continue to support UNRWA during this period and calls on the agency at the same time to continue on its path for reforms in line with the recommendations of the Colonna report. And finally, on the long-term perspective for a two-stage solution, the only sustainable objective is a negotiated two-state solution in which two independent states, Israel and Palestine, live side by side in peace and security. The New York Declaration, drafted by France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and endorsed by the General Assembly by over 140 votes, including Austria, provides an important framework for this long-term vision. Austria supports the Palestinian people's right to self-determination and the establishment of a democratic, viable, and contiguous Palestinian state, with Gaza as an integral part of this state. Unilateral actions that undermine this perspective, including the continued expansion of settlements in the West Bank, are violations of international law and must stop. Excellencies, Mr. President, Austria's commitment to peace, international law, and human dignity is unwavering. The international community has a duty to enable, to support, and to hold all sides accountable. You can count on Austria to continue standing on the side of peace, justice, and humanity. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Австрии за его выступление. Сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Исламской Республики Иран.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, Mr. President, since this is the first time I will take the floor this month, I would like to extend my sincere congratulations to the Russian Federation for assuming the presidency of the Security Council this month and commend you. Mr. President, the Israeli occupying regime has become a manifest and serious threat to regional and international peace and security. For over 2 years, the people in Gaza has endured an unprecedented and all-out war of extermination by this regime. During this time, Israel has engaged in systematic, indiscriminate, and disproportionate bombardment of innocent people. More than 68,000 innocent Palestinians have been killed. Thousands remain missing, and over 20,000 children have lost their lives. The entire infrastructure have been obliterated. Hospitals, schools, and water systems have been reduced to rubble. In fact, Gaza has been transformed into a landscape of devastation, a living testament of unbridled impunity. With the end of military operation in Gaza, the world is only beginning to grasp the full extent of the devastation left behind. Mr. President, Israeli aggression and criminal acts are not confined to Gaza. Islamic Republic of Iran has also been a direct target of Israeli aggression. Between 13 to 24 June, Israel launched unprovoked and large-scale attack against residential area, hospitals, and peaceful nuclear facilities under full IAEA safeguards. As a result of this indiscriminate and unlawful attack, 1,100 innocent civilians, including 132 women and 45 children, have lost their lives, and more than 5,700 others have been injured. Mr. President, the Islamic Republic of Iran supports every credible initiative aimed at ending the genocide in Gaza, ensuring the complete withdrawal of the occupying forces, establishing a permanent ceasefire, facilitating the unhindered delivery of humanitarian aid, and restoring the inalienable and fundamental right of the Palestinian people. The ending war against people in Gaza, however vital, does not absolve member states and competent international bodies of their shared legal, moral, and humanitarian obligation to ensure justice and accountability. The perpetrators and masterminds of war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity must be prosecuted, and the decades-long culture of impunity surrounding the Israeli regime must finally end. In conclusion, Mr. President, I categorically reject the unfounded allegation made by the United States representative. Iran's foreign policy is firmly rooted in the UN Charter and international law, respecting sovereignty, territorial integrity, non-interference, and good neighborliness. It is, in fact, the unlawful military presence and destabilizing action of the United States that have fueled the conflict and instability in our region. Iran has consistently shown its readiness for fair, genuine dialogue. Furthermore, the false narrative of Iranian proxies is a deliberate distraction from the true source of regional instability, the United States, and its unconditional support for its proxy in the region, the Israeli regime, enabling its ongoing aggression, atrocities, and occupation. By repeatedly obstructing the Security Council Charter mandate, Washington has rendered itself complicit in these crimes and bears direct legal and moral responsibility for their continuation. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Исламской Республики Иран за его выступление. В моем списке остается еще ряд ораторов, записавшихся для выступлений на этом заседании. Однако, с учетом времени, я намерен, с согласия членов Совета, прерывать заседание до 15 часов 00 минут. Заседание прерывается.